The Winter Widow. Clara Hensley stepped off the stagecoach into a blizzard that felt like the end of the world, her twin babies screaming against her chest as ice cut through her threadbare shawl. The man who'd promised to marry her, the man whose letters had been her only hope for 3 desperate months, took one look at the children and said the words that would haunt her. "I don't take damaged goods." In that moment, standing in the frozen mud of Riverdale's depot with nowhere to go and 2 babies depending on her survival, Clara understood that sometimes salvation doesn't come from the men who promise it. It comes from the ones who never had to. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far Clara's story travels. And if her fight moves you, hit that like button and stay until the end, because what happens next will change everything you think you know about second chances. The Dakota Territory had a way of stripping a person down to their essential truth, and by the time Clara Hensley arrived in Riverdale on the second Tuesday of February 1883, she'd already been reduced to bone and will. The stagecoach door opened onto a main street that looked like every other frontier town she'd passed through. False-fronted buildings, rutted mud frozen into ridges, a few oil lamps fighting the 4 o'clock darkness of a winter afternoon. But this was supposed to be different. This was supposed to be home. She'd been traveling for 11 days. St. Louis to Omaha by rail, Omaha to Yankton by packet steamer when the ice allowed, Yankton to Riverdale by stagecoach, sitting upright the entire way because lying down meant the twins would cry and the other passengers would complain. Her arms ached from holding them. Her milk had nearly dried up from exhaustion and poor food. But she'd made it. Gideon Hale was supposed to be waiting. Clara scanned the handful of people outside the depot. A freight clerk, 2 cowboys heading into the saloon, an old woman with a market basket. No one stepped forward. No one smiled. She felt the first cold finger of doubt trace down her spine as she climbed down, her skirts heavy with mud from the last relay station, the twins bundled against her in a sling she'd fashioned from a shawl. "Mrs. Hensley?" The depot agent peered at her from the doorway, his breath steaming. "You the mail-order bride?" The word struck like a slap. She'd never thought of herself that way. Not quite. She and Gideon had corresponded. He'd written first, responding to her advertisement in the matrimonial news. A respectable businessman, he'd said. A dry goods store owner looking for a helpmate. A woman of character who understood hard work. She'd been honest about her situation. Widowed young, 2 infants, no family, no means. He'd written back with what seemed like kindness. "Every soul deserves the second start," he'd said. "Come to Riverdale. I'll be waiting." "Yes," Clara said, lifting her chin. "I'm expected." The agent grunted. Hale's inside, been waiting an hour, didn't seem pleased about it. The doubt became dread. Clara adjusted her hold on the babies, Lucy on the left, Samuel on the right, both mercifully asleep, and walked into the depot. It was a cramped room that smelled of coal smoke and wet wool, a pot-bellied stove throwing heat into one corner. And there, standing beside a stack of mail sacks with his pocket watch open in his palm, was Gideon Hale. She recognized him from the tintype he'd sent. Tall, clean-shaven, dark hair pomaded back, a mouth that looked like it didn't smile often. He wore a good wool coat, polished boots, a silk cravat. A man of means, just as he'd claimed. But when he looked up and saw her, saw the babies, his expression went from impatience to something far worse. Disgust. "Mr. Hale," Clara said, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "I'm Clara Hensley. We've arrived." He snapped the watch shut. "You didn't mention twins." The air seemed to thicken. Clara felt every eye in the depot shift toward them. The agent, a woman waiting for the westbound stage, a clerk sorting parcels. She kept her voice low, dignified. "I wrote that I had 2 infants. I was quite clear." "You said children. You didn't say babies." Gideon stepped closer, and she could smell bay rum and tobacco, see the tight line of his jaw. "You didn't say you'd be bringing them with you like luggage." Heat flooded Clara's face. "They're 6 months old, Mr. Hale. Where exactly did you think they'd be?" "I thought—" He stopped, exhaled through his nose. When he spoke again, his voice was pitched for the audience they'd gathered. "I'm a businessman, Miss Hensley. My reputation in this town is built on integrity and sound judgment. I can't afford to be seen taking in a woman with questionable circumstances and another man's children. Questionable. Clara's breath caught. I'm a widow. My husband died of cholera. There is nothing questionable about my circumstances except poverty, and you knew that from the start. I knew you were available, Gideon said, his tone turning cold. I didn't know you'd come with obligations that would make me a laughingstock. One of the twins stirred against her chest. Samuel, she thought, though it was hard to tell through the layers of cloth. The small movement seemed to catch Gideon's eye, and his face hardened further. I'm sorry for your trouble, but I can't marry you. This was clearly a misunderstanding. The floor seemed to tilt beneath Clara's feet. She'd spent her last $12 on the stagecoach fare from Yankton. She had no return ticket, no family, no prospects. The advertisement she'd placed had drawn only 3 responses, and Gideon's had been the only one that hadn't proposed something lewd or illegal. You wrote me, she said, and hated the pleading edge that crept into her voice. You said you wanted a wife. You said every soul deserved a second start. And I meant it, but I won't be made a fool of. Gideon pulled a small leather wallet from his coat, extracted 2 silver dollars, and held them out. The Riverdale Hotel is 2 blocks north. This should cover a couple of nights while you make other arrangements. Clara stared at the coins. $2. In a town where she knew no one. With 2 babies. In February. I have nowhere to go, she whispered. Then I suggest you think carefully before you travel across the country to meet strangers. Gideon set the coins on the edge of the mail desk and turned toward the door. Good luck, Miss Hensley. And then he was gone, the depot door swinging shut behind him, leaving Clara standing alone with her children and the eyes of every stranger boring into her back. The silence stretched. Clara felt the sting of tears but refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of these people. She reached for the $2 with a hand that trembled, folded them into her pocket, and turned toward the door. Wait! The voice was firm, female, tinged with an accent Clara couldn't place. German, maybe, or Scandinavian. A woman pushed through the small crowd, older, perhaps 50, with steel gray hair pinned in a severe bun and a face carved by weather and work. She wore a practical wool coat and sturdy boots, and her eyes were sharp as a hawk's. You're the mail-order bride, the woman said. It wasn't a question. I was, Clara said quietly. Do you have anywhere to stay? Clara hesitated, then shook her head. The woman exhaled, a sound of pure exasperation. Of course you don't. Men like Gideon Hale are all promises and no spine. She held out a gloved hand. Martha Webb, I run the boarding house on 2nd Street. You'll stay with me tonight. No charge. The kindness, so sudden, so unexpected, nearly broke Clara's composure. I can't ask you to You didn't ask. I'm telling. Martha's grip was strong when Clara took her hand. Come on before those babies freeze. We'll sort the rest out later. Martha Webb's boarding house was a 2-story clapboard building with a wide porch and smoke rising from 2 chimneys. The front room was warm, cluttered with mismatched furniture and the smell of something savory cooking in the back. Martha led Clara upstairs to a small bedroom with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a cradle that looked like it had been waiting for exactly this moment. My daughter's, Martha said, nodding toward the cradle. She's grown now, married, living in Yankton. No use for it anymore. She set down the carpetbag Clara had carried from the depot and turned to face her squarely. You'll sleep here tonight. Tomorrow we'll talk about what comes next. Clara sank onto the edge of the bed, the twins still bundled against her. I don't know how to thank you. Don't thank me yet. You're not out of the woods. Martha crossed her arms. What were you planning to do if Gideon had married you? Work, Clara said simply. Keep house. Help with his store if he needed it. Raise my children. Be a wife. And now? Clara met her gaze. I'll find work. I can sew. I can cook. I can read and write and keep accounts. I'll find something. Martha studied her for a long moment, then nodded. You've got spine. That's good. You'll need it in Riverdale. She moved toward the door, then paused. Get some rest. I'll bring up supper in an hour. If those babies need anything, holler." After Martha left, Clara finally allowed herself to breathe. She unwrapped the twins carefully, laying them side by side in the cradle. Lucy yawned, her tiny fist curling against Samuel's cheek. They looked so small, so fragile, so utterly dependent on a mother who'd just been publicly humiliated and left with nowhere to go. Clara knelt beside the cradle, pressing her forehead to the worn wood. She didn't pray. She'd lost the habit after Thomas died, but she made herself a promise. "I will not let you starve. I will not let you freeze. I will find a way," even if she had no idea what that way might be. Supper was beef stew and cornbread served in the boarding house's dining room at a long table that seated 8. There were only 3 others eating when Clara came down. 2 ranch hands and an older gentleman Martha introduced as Mr. Carlson, a retired surveyor. The men nodded politely but didn't ask questions, which Clara took as a mercy. She ate quickly, one eye on the ceiling above where the twins were still sleeping. "They'll wake soon enough," Martha said, ladling more stew into Clara's bowl without asking. "Eat while you can." Clara obeyed, too hungry to argue. The food was simple but well made, seasoned with care, and it was the first hot meal she'd had in 3 days. She felt strength returning to her limbs, clarity to her thoughts. "Martha," she said quietly when the men had finished and gone, "why did you help me?" Martha set down her spoon. "Because I know what it's like to be stranded in a strange place with no one to turn to. And because Gideon Hale is a hypocrite and a coward, and I'll be damned if I let him ruin a woman's life without a fight." Clara blinked. "You know him?" "Everyone knows everyone in Riverdale. Gideon owns the dry goods store, sits on the town council, sings in the church choir, calls himself a pillar of the community." Martha's mouth twisted. "But he's also the kind of man who'll court a woman by mail, promise her security, then cast her aside the minute she's inconvenient. I've seen it before." "He's done this before?" "Not exactly this, but he broke an engagement 3 years ago when the girl's father went bankrupt. Gideon said he couldn't afford to tie himself to a failing enterprise. She left town in disgrace." Martha met Clara's eyes. "Men like him hide their cruelty behind respectability. Makes my blood boil." Clara felt a flicker of something she hadn't expected, not just gratitude, but kinship. Martha Webb was a woman who saw injustice and acted. That was rare, precious. "I don't want charity," Clara said carefully. "If I stay here, I need to work, to pay my way." "Understood. But first you need to rest and figure out your next step. Riverdale's not a big town, but there might be opportunities if you know where to look." Before Clara could respond, the sound of a baby crying drifted down from upstairs. Lucy, from the pitch. Clara was halfway to the stairs when Martha called after her. "There's a doctor in town," Martha said. "My brother-in-law, widowed like you. He's a good man, fair. If you need help with those babies, medical help I mean, he won't charge you." Clara paused on the bottom step. "What's his name?" "Nathaniel Webb," Martha said. "Dr. Nathaniel Webb. And before you ask, no, he's nothing like Gideon Hale." Clara didn't meet Dr. Webb that night. She spent the hours after supper tending to the twins, feeding them, changing their swaddling, walking the small bedroom floor when Samuel fussed. By the time both babies finally settled into sleep, it was past 10, and Clara collapsed into bed fully clothed, too exhausted to undress. She dreamed of Thomas. They were in the small tenement flat they'd shared in St. Louis, and he was alive, smiling, holding Lucy while Clara nursed Samuel. But when she looked closer, his face was gray, his eyes sunken, and she knew, even in the dream, that he was already dying. She woke with tears on her face and the twins stirring in the cradle beside her. Morning came cold and bright. Clara washed at the basin, changed the babies, and carried them downstairs to find Martha already at work in the kitchen. The older woman barely glanced up from the dough she was kneading. "There's coffee on the stove. Help yourself." Clara poured a cup, the warmth seeping into her hands. "Martha, I need to ask, do you know of anyone hiring? Anyone who might need help?" Martha paused, her hands stilling in the dough. "Not many women work outside their homes here, Clara. It's a small town, traditional." "I'm not traditional. I'm desperate." "I know," Martha sighed. There's the laundry, but Mrs. Kowalski runs that with her daughters and doesn't need help. The dress shop is owned by Mrs. Thornton, and she's particular about who she employs. You might try the hotel, but they usually hire men for the heavy work. Clara's heart sank. What do other women do? They marry or they leave. Martha met her gaze. I'm sorry, Clara. I wish I had better news. The twins began to fuss. Clara jostled them gently, her mind racing. She had $2, maybe 3 days of shelter if Martha's generosity held. And then what? She couldn't go back to St. Louis. There was nothing there but Thomas's grave and the landlord she still owed rent. She couldn't travel further west without money. She was trapped. A knock sounded at the front door. Martha wiped her hands on her apron and went to answer it. Clara heard voices. Martha's and a man's, low and steady. A moment later, Martha returned with a man following behind her. Clara, Martha said, this is my brother-in-law, Dr. Nathaniel Webb. Clara looked up, and the world seemed to pause. Dr. Webb was not what she'd expected. He was tall, perhaps 40, with dark hair silvered at the temples and eyes the color of slate. He wore a simple black coat and trousers, no pretense, no flash. But it was his face that caught her. Weathered, yes, but kind. The kind of face that had seen suffering and learned compassion from it. Mrs. Hensley, he said, and his voice matched his face, quiet, steady, respectful. Martha told me about your situation. I thought I might check on your children, if you'll allow it. No charge. Clara's throat tightened. That's very kind. It's practical, Nathaniel said. Frontier towns lose too many infants to neglect and ignorance. If I can prevent that, I will. He knelt beside the cradle Martha had brought downstairs and examined the twins with gentle efficiency, listening to their breathing, checking their color, running careful hands over their small bodies. Lucy stared up at him with solemn eyes. Samuel grabbed his finger and held on. They're thin, Nathaniel said after a moment. But healthy. You've done well by them, Mrs. Hensley. The travel couldn't have been easy. It wasn't. Clara hesitated. Doctor, may I ask, how much do I owe you? Nathaniel straightened, releasing Samuel's grip. Nothing. Consider it a welcome to Riverdale. I don't take charity. It's not charity. It's medicine. He met her eyes, and Clara saw something flicker there. Recognition, maybe. Understanding. Martha says you're looking for work. I am. Can you read? Yes, I can write and cipher too. Nathaniel glanced at Martha, who gave a small nod. I need help, he said. My practice has grown, and I can't manage alone anymore. I need someone to keep records, prepare supplies, assist with patients when necessary. It's not easy work, and some of it isn't pleasant. But it pays a fair wage, and there's a room above the practice where you could live. Both of you, all three of you. Clara stared at him. You're offering me a position? I'm offering you a chance. Nathaniel's expression remained neutral, professional. If you want it. Clara looked down at the twins, then back at him. Why? Because Martha tells me you're capable and you need work. And because I'm tired of watching this town chew up people who don't deserve it. He paused. But I'll be honest with you, Mrs. Hensley. There will be talk. A widow working for a widower, living under his roof, people will gossip. If that's more than you're willing to bear, I understand. Clara thought of Gideon Hale's face. The disgust. The dismissal. The $2 silver that were supposed to solve everything. Let them talk, she said quietly. When do I start? Nathaniel almost smiled. Tomorrow. Come to the practice at 8. It's the White House with the blue door on 3rd Street. You can't miss it. That afternoon, Martha helped Clara move her few belongings to the room above Dr. Webb's practice. It was small but clean, a bedroom with a real bed, a sitting area with a stove, and a window that looked out over the main street. The cradle fit perfectly in the corner. Clara stood in the center of the room, the twins drowsing in her arms, and felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. He's a good man, Martha said, setting down the carpetbag. Nathaniel. He lost his wife 5 years ago. Fever. They'd only been married 2 years. He's been alone ever since. Clara looked at her. Why are you telling me this? Because you should know. He's not doing this out of pity. He's doing it because he sees something in you. Martha's expression softened. And because maybe he's tired of being alone too. I'm not looking for a husband, Martha. I didn't say you were. I'm just saying, keep an open mind. Martha squeezed her shoulder. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. After Martha left, Clara fed the twins, changed them, and settled them in the cradle. She stood at the window as the sun set, painting the Dakota sky in shades of copper and rose. Below, the town moved through its evening routines. Shopkeepers closing, cowboys riding in, lamps being lit in windows. It looked almost peaceful. But Clara knew better. Riverdale might look like sanctuary, but it was also the place that had rejected her. The place where Gideon Hale walked free while she hid in a room above a stranger's practice, grateful for scraps of kindness. She touched the wedding ring she still wore on her left hand, Thomas's ring, thin gold, inscribed with their initials. She'd thought about selling it a dozen times during the journey, but she couldn't. It was all she had left of the life she'd planned, the future that had died with him. Tomorrow she'd start over. Again. She'd work for Dr. Webb, learn what he needed, prove her worth. She'd make a place for herself and her children in this hard, unforgiving town. And if people talked, let them talk. She'd survived worse. Dr. Nathaniel Webb's practice occupied the ground floor of a modest white house on the corner of 3rd and Main. Clara arrived at 8 sharp, the twins bundled against the morning cold, and found the door unlocked. Inside, the front room had been converted into a waiting area with wooden benches and a desk. Beyond that, she could see an examination room and what looked like a small surgery. Nathaniel emerged from the back, wiping his hands on a towel. Mrs. Hensley, good, you're prompt. I'm grateful for the opportunity, Doctor. Nathaniel, he said, if we're going to work together, we should use first names. Formality slows things down. Clara hesitated, then nodded. Nathaniel. And I'm Clara. Good. He gestured toward the desk. Your main job will be managing the appointment book, keeping track of supplies, and preparing instruments. I'll teach you what you need to know. Can you handle blood? I've birthed twins, Nathaniel. I can handle blood. The corner of his mouth quirked. Not quite a smile, but close. Fair point. Let's start with the filing system. The work was methodical, precise, and utterly absorbing. Nathaniel showed her how he organized patient records, how he tracked medications, how he sterilized instruments. He explained the basics of wound care, fever management, childbirth assistance. Clara listened, asked questions, took mental notes. The twins slept in a basket near the desk, waking occasionally to nurse, then settling again. By noon, Clara's head was swimming with information, but she felt alive in a way she hadn't since Thomas died. This was purpose. This was contribution. This was something more than survival. Nathaniel brought lunch, bread and cheese from the bakery, apples from somewhere. They ate quickly, standing, between patients. An old man with a cough, a child with a splinter, a pregnant woman needing reassurance. Nathaniel treated each person with the same careful attention, and Clara began to see the rhythm of his work. The way he listened, the way he touched only as much as necessary, the way he explained things in plain language. You're good at this, she said during a quiet moment. Nathaniel glanced at her. So are you. I've only been here 5 hours. And you've already anticipated what I need 3 times. That's instinct. It can't be taught. He paused, cleaning a scalpel. You're wasted on filing, Clara. If you're willing, I'd like to teach you more. Real medical work. Clara's pulse quickened. You mean assisting with procedures? I mean learning to diagnose, to treat, to think like a physician. Nathaniel set down the scalpel and met her eyes. There are women doctors now, Clara. Not many, but some. If you have the mind for it, and I think you do, there's no reason you can't learn the skills. But I'm not educated. I didn't go to medical school. Neither did half the doctors on the frontier. We learn by doing. He crossed his arms. I'm not promising you a degree or a license, but I can promise you knowledge, skills, the ability to help people, if that's something you want. Clara thought of the twins upstairs, of the future she was trying to build from nothing, of the way Gideon Hale had looked at her, like she was worthless. I want it, she said. Then we start tomorrow. Nathaniel turned back to his instruments. For now, finish the filing. We've got a delivery coming this afternoon. A pregnant woman, first baby, breech position. She'll need both of us." Clara felt fear and exhilaration flood through her in equal measure. This was real. This was happening. She got back to work. The delivery happened just after sunset. The woman, Sarah Martin, a farmer's wife barely 20, arrived at the practice in the back of a wagon, her face gray with pain, her husband frantic beside her. Nathaniel took one look and barked orders. "Clara, boil water, lots of it, then bring clean linens and the surgical kit." Clara moved without thinking, her hands steady even as her heart raced. She'd seen birth before, her own, and Thomas's sister's, but never like this. Never with someone depending on her to help. Nathaniel worked with absolute focus, his hand sure as he examined Sarah, assessed the situation, made his decision. "The baby's turned wrong," he said quietly. "I'm going to have to turn it manually. Clara, I need you to hold her hand and keep her calm. Can you do that?" "Yes." "Good. Sarah, I need you to trust me. This is going to hurt, but I'm going to get your baby out safely. Clara's going to stay with you the whole time." Sarah's eyes were wide with terror, but she nodded. Clara took her hand, gripping tight, and began to talk, low, steady, the way she'd talked to the twins when they were frightened. Nonsense words, reassurances, anything to keep Sarah focused on something other than the pain. Nathaniel worked quickly, his jaw tight with concentration. Clara watched his hands, the careful precision, the way he moved with Sarah's body instead of against it. Minutes stretched. Sarah screamed once, then bit down on a leather strap Nathaniel had given her, and then a baby's cry. Thin, reedy, but strong. Nathaniel lifted a tiny, blood-slicked infant, a girl, and handed her to Clara. "Clean her, quickly." Clara's hand shook as she took the baby, but she didn't drop her. She wiped the infant clean, wrapped her in warm linen, and placed her in Sarah's trembling arms. The new mother sobbed, clutching her daughter, and her husband wept openly. Nathaniel finished the delivery, cleaned up, then stepped back. His shirt was stained with blood, his face drawn with exhaustion. But when he met Clara's eyes, she saw satisfaction there. Pride. "You did well," he said quietly. Clara realized she was shaking. "I was terrified." "So was I." Nathaniel pulled off his stained apron. "That's what keeps us careful." After the Martins left, Sarah weak but smiling, the baby swaddled against her chest. Clara helped Nathaniel clean the examination room. They worked in silence, scrubbing surfaces, boiling instruments, restoring order. It was past midnight when they finally finished. "Go upstairs," Nathaniel said. "Get some sleep. We have a full day tomorrow." Clara nodded but didn't move. "Nathaniel, thank you. For today. For all of it." He looked at her, really looked, and Clara saw exhaustion in his eyes, but also something gentler. Understanding, maybe, or recognition of a kindred spirit. "You don't need to thank me, Clara. You earned this." He paused. "Get some rest. You're going to need it." Clara climbed the stairs to her room, checked on the sleeping twins, and collapsed into bed without undressing. Her mind was still racing, replaying the delivery, Nathaniel's steady voice, the moment the baby cried. She'd helped save a life tonight. She'd been useful, necessary. For the first time since Thomas died, Clara felt like herself again. And as she drifted toward sleep, she thought of Gideon Hale and his disgust, his $2 silver, his certainty that she was nothing. He'd been wrong. She was going to make sure the whole town knew it. The following week settled into a rhythm that felt both foreign and necessary. Clara woke before dawn to feed the twins, then carried them downstairs to the practice where Nathaniel was already at work, reviewing notes, preparing instruments, sometimes reading by lamplight from one of the medical texts that lined his shelves. He'd nod when she entered, pour her coffee without asking, and they'd begin the day's work in a silence that felt less like awkwardness and more like understanding. Riverdale watched them with the vigilance of a town that had little else to occupy its attention. Clara felt the eyes following her when she walked to the mercantile for supplies, heard the whispers that stopped when she approached. The widowed doctor and the abandoned mail-order bride living under one roof. It didn't matter that Martha vouched for Clara's character or that the room above the practice had its own entrance. It didn't matter that Nathaniel treated her with nothing but professional respect. The town had made its judgment, and Clara learned quickly that facts rarely swayed opinions once they'd hardened into gossip. "Let them talk," Nathaniel said one morning when Clara mentioned the stares she'd received at the post office. He was stitching a gash in a ranch hand's forearm, his movements precise and unhurried. "They talked when I first came to Riverdale, too. Said I was too young to be a real doctor. Said I'd kill someone within a month. 5 years later, I'm still here and most of them are still alive." The ranch hand, a grizzled man named Pete, who smelled of horses and tobacco, grunted his agreement. "Town's got nothing better to do than wag its tongue, ma'am. You just keep your head down and do your work. They'll find someone else to chew on soon enough." But they didn't. If anything, the attention intensified as Clara's role in the practice expanded. Nathaniel was true to his word about teaching her, and within 3 weeks she'd progressed from filing records to assisting with examinations, mixing medicines, even diagnosing simple ailments under his supervision. She had a gift for it. That became clear quickly. She could read symptoms the way some people read faces, intuiting connections between complaints that seemed unrelated. A persistent cough and swollen ankles meant heart strain, not just age. A child's irritability and pale gums meant anemia, not bad temperament. Nathaniel noticed her aptitude and pushed her harder, giving her medical texts to read at night, questioning her relentlessly about anatomy and treatment protocols. "You're thinking like a physician," he told her one afternoon after she'd correctly identified a case of scarlet fever in a girl whose mother had insisted was merely teething. "Most people I've trained took months to develop that instinct. You've got it naturally." Clara felt a flush of pride she hadn't experienced since Thomas had praised her bookkeeping at his clerk's office years ago. "I had a good teacher. You had the capacity. I just gave it direction." Nathaniel washed his hands at the basin, his back to her. "I'm going to start letting you handle walk-in cases on your own. Simple things. Cuts, bruises, common colds. I'll be in the next room if you need me." "You trust me that much?" He turned, and his expression was serious. "I wouldn't put patients at risk if I didn't. You've earned this, Clara. Don't doubt it." But that evening, when Clara went to the mercantile to buy flour and cornmeal, she discovered that Riverdale's opinion remained unchanged. Gideon Hale was behind the counter, impeccably dressed as always, helping an elderly woman select fabric. He didn't acknowledge Clara's entrance, didn't look her way even when she approached with her purchases. She set them on the counter and waited. Gideon finished with the older woman, accepted her payment with a gracious smile, then finally turned to Clara. His expression went carefully blank. "Miss Hensley." "Mrs. Hensley," Clara corrected quietly. "I'm still a widow, Mr. Hale, not a spinster." A muscle jumped in his jaw. "Of course, my apologies." He tallied her purchases with brisk efficiency. $1.40. Clara counted out the coins, earned money, her own wages from Nathaniel, and felt a fierce satisfaction in the transaction. She wasn't begging anymore, wasn't dependent on charity or broken promises. "I hear you're working for Dr. Webb now," Gideon said as he wrapped her purchases in brown paper. His tone was neutral, but Clara heard the judgment underneath. "Quite the arrangement you've managed." "I'm his medical assistant," Clara said evenly. "I keep records, prepare supplies, and assist with patients. It's honest work." "I'm sure it is." Gideon's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Though I wonder what your late husband would think of you living above another man's business, raising his children in such proximity." The blow landed exactly where he'd aimed it. Clara's hands tightened on the wrapped parcel, but she kept her voice steady. "My late husband would be grateful his children have a roof over their heads and a mother who can provide for them. Unlike some men in this town, Thomas understood that dignity comes from work, not from maintaining appearances." Gideon's facade cracked slightly. "Careful, Mrs. Hensley. Riverdale's a small town. Reputations matter. Yours is already questionable. I'd hate to see you make it worse through reckless talk." "My reputation is built on what I do, Mr. Hale, not on what small minds imagine I'm doing, if you'll excuse me." Clara took her purchases and walked out, her spine straight, her heart hammering. She made it halfway down the street before her hands started shaking. Martha was sweeping the boarding house porch when Clara passed. The older woman took one look at her face and set down the broom. "What happened?" "Gideon Hale happened." Clara's voice came out thin, angry. He as good as called me a fallen woman in his own store. Martha's mouth tightened into a grim line. That man's got a lot of nerve considering what he did to you. Come inside, I'll make tea. I should get back. The twins are with Nathaniel. I saw him carrying them upstairs 20 minutes ago when they got fussy. They're fine. Martha gestured toward the door. Come on, you need to sit down before you fall down. In Martha's kitchen, with strong tea and ginger cookies, Clara's anger gradually shifted into something colder and more useful. Martha listened without interrupting as Clara recounted the exchange, then sat back with a thoughtful expression. Gideon's afraid of you, Martha said finally. Clara blinked. What? He's afraid. You showed up with nothing, got rejected publicly, and within a month you're working alongside the most respected professional in town. You're learning skills most men don't have. You're providing for your children without a husband. That terrifies men like Gideon because it proves you don't need them. Martha leaned forward, bawled. And worse, it proves they're not as essential as they think they are. I'm not trying to prove anything. I'm just trying to survive. I know that. But Gideon sees it differently. To him, every day you succeed is a day his assumptions about women are proven wrong. Men like him hate being wrong. Clara wrapped her hands around her teacup. So what do I do? Exactly what you're doing. Keep working. Keep learning. Don't give him ammunition. Martha paused. And be prepared. Men like Gideon don't like being challenged. He'll push back eventually. You need to be ready. The warning proved prophetic sooner than Clara expected. 2 days later, a woman named Eleanor Thornton, owner of the dress shop and, from what Clara had observed, the unofficial arbiter of Riverdale's social hierarchy, appeared at the practice with her daughter Lydia, who'd apparently developed a persistent cough. Nathaniel was out on a house call, so Clara took the appointment herself. Lydia was 16, pale and thin, with shadows under her eyes. The cough was wet and productive, and when Clara examined her, she noted slight swelling in the lymph nodes and a low-grade fever. Consumption, possibly, though it could also be pneumonia or even just a severe chest cold that needed monitoring. I'd like Dr. Webb to examine her as well when he returns, Clara said, making notes. But in the meantime, I'm going to prepare a tonic for the cough and recommend bed rest. Keep her warm, make sure she's eating. I didn't ask for your recommendations, Eleanor interrupted. Her voice was sharp, dismissive. I asked to see the doctor. Clara looked up from her notes. Dr. Webb is attending to a difficult childbirth across town. He won't be back for several hours. I can help Lydia now, or you can wait. I'll wait for a real physician. Thank you. Eleanor stood, gathering her daughter with her. I'm not having my child treated by some assistant who learned medicine from pillow talk. The words hung in the air like poison. Clara felt heat flood her face, but she kept her voice level. Mrs. Thornton, I understand your concern, but Lydia's condition shouldn't wait. If you won't accept my help, at least let me send word to Dr. Webb to prioritize her case when he returns. What I won't accept is medical advice from a woman whose morals are questionable at best. Eleanor's eyes were cold. Come along, Lydia. We'll see Dr. Henderson in the next town. They left, the door swinging shut behind them with a decisive click. Clara stood in the empty examination room, her notes unfinished, her hands trembling with suppressed fury. She wanted to scream, wanted to chase after Eleanor Thornton and demand to know what gave her the right to judge, to dismiss, to assume. But she didn't. She finished her notes, filed them carefully, and went back to work. When Nathaniel returned 3 hours later, exhausted and blood-spattered from a successful but difficult delivery, he found Clara scrubbing instruments with more force than necessary. He took one look at her face and closed the door to the examination room. What happened? Clara told him. Every word, every implication. Nathaniel listened without interrupting, his expression growing progressively darker. Eleanor Thornton is a sanctimonious hypocrite, he said when Clara finished. Her husband made his fortune running a gambling hall in Deadwood before they came here. She's got no business lecturing anyone about morals. That doesn't change what she thinks, what they all think. Clara set down the instrument she'd been scrubbing and faced him. Nathaniel, maybe this was a mistake. Maybe I should find somewhere else to work. I'm damaging your reputation. Stop. Nathaniel's voice was firm. My reputation can withstand gossip. Can yours? Mine's already ruined. No, it's not. It's being tested. There's a difference. He crossed his arms. Clara, I'm going to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. Do you want to continue learning medicine, not because you need the work? I'll pay you regardless, but because you actually want to do this? Clara didn't hesitate. Yes. Why? She thought about Sarah Martin's baby, alive because they'd acted quickly. About the fever she'd broken in a child last week with the right combination of willow bark and cold compresses. About the way it felt to solve the puzzle of symptoms and find the answer that brought relief. Because I'm good at it, she said quietly. Because it matters. Because when I'm helping someone, I'm not a widow or a failed mail-order bride or a woman people whisper about. I'm just someone who knows how to help. And that feels right. Nathaniel nodded slowly. Then we continue. And we ignore the Eleanor Thorntons of the world. Agreed? Agreed. But ignoring proved easier said than done. Over the next week, Clara noticed a shift. Fewer patients came to the practice. The ones who did often asked specifically for Dr. Webb, not for the assistant. One woman actually crossed herself when Clara entered the room, as though proximity to moral corruption was contagious. Nathaniel noticed too, though he said nothing, just worked longer hours to accommodate the patients who remained and kept teaching Clara with the same intensity. Then came the incident with the Peterson boy. Tommy Peterson was 8 years old, the son of a ranch foreman, and he'd been kicked by a horse. His father brought him to the practice at a dead run, the boy unconscious and bleeding from a gash above his right eye. Nathaniel was in the middle of setting a broken arm for another patient, a delicate procedure he couldn't abandon, so Clara took the case herself. She worked fast, cleaned the wound, checked for signs of skull fracture, stitched the gash with steady hands while Tommy's father held the boy still. The cut was ugly but not deep, no bone damage she could detect, pupils equal and reactive. Probable concussion, but survivable. She bandaged him carefully, gave his father instructions for monitoring through the night, and sent them home with strict orders to return if Tommy showed any worsening symptoms. Nathaniel finished the arm setting and came to check her work. He examined her notes, studied the boy's chart, then nodded. Good work. Clean stitches, appropriate treatment. You did everything right. Clara felt a surge of relief. I was terrified I'd missed something. You didn't. Trust your training. He washed his hands, then paused. How did the father react to you treating Tommy? He didn't care who stitched his son as long as someone did it quickly. Clara managed a tired smile. Funny how emergencies make people forget to be judgmental. That's the advantage of medicine, Nathaniel said. When someone's bleeding, they stop caring about propriety and start caring about competence. But 2 days later, Clara learned that competence wasn't always enough. She was sweeping the practice waiting room when she heard raised voices outside, Nathaniel's and another man's. She set down the broom and went to the window. Nathaniel stood on the porch, his posture tense, facing 3 men, Gideon Hale, Eleanor Thornton's husband Charles, and Mayor Whitfield, a portly man with mutton chops who owned the town's only bank. All 3 looked grim. This is absurd, Nathaniel was saying. Clara Hensley is a trained medical assistant. She's qualified to handle basic cases under my supervision. She's a woman with no formal education and questionable character, Gideon said flatly. Letting her practice medicine even under supervision is irresponsible and potentially dangerous. Tommy Peterson's father disagrees. So do the dozen other patients she's helped in the past month. One successful case doesn't make her a physician, Nathaniel. Mayor Whitfield's tone was conciliatory, but firm. We're not questioning her intentions. We're questioning the wisdom of allowing someone without proper credentials to perform medical procedures. What if something had gone wrong? Nothing went wrong because Clara knows what she's doing. I've trained her myself. You've been training her for a month, Charles Thornton interrupted. Real doctors spend years in medical school. You can't seriously expect us to believe she's qualified after a few weeks of on-the-job learning. Clara's hands clenched at her sides. She wanted to march out there, to defend herself, to explain that she'd read every medical text Nathaniel owned, that she studied late into the night after the twins slept, that she understood anatomy and pharmacology better than some physicians she'd met. But she also understood that her voice would only make things worse. These men hadn't come to listen. They'd come to assert control. What exactly are you asking me to do? Nathaniel's voice had gone dangerously quiet. Replace her, Gideon said. Hire a male assistant, someone with actual training. There is no one with actual training available in Riverdale, you know that. Then hire someone untrained but appropriate, a young man who can learn properly without creating scandal. The scandal exists in your minds, gentlemen, not in reality. Clara lives in a separate room, works professional hours, and maintains absolute propriety. The gossip is your creation, not hers. Mayor Whitfield cleared his throat. Nathaniel, be reasonable. We're not trying to ruin the woman. We're trying to protect the town's standards. Surely you can see our position. What I see is 3 men who are threatened by a capable woman and are hiding behind false concern for public welfare. Nathaniel's tone could have cut glass. Clara stays. If you have a problem with that, take it up with the Territorial Medical Board. We might do exactly that, Gideon said. The board has standards for medical assistants. I doubt Mrs. Hensley meets them. Then file your complaint. But until the board rules otherwise, Clara continues working here. Nathaniel stepped back toward the door. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have patients to see. He came inside, closing the door firmly behind him, and found Clara standing in the middle of the waiting room. Their eyes met, and she saw anger there, but also worry. You heard, he said, every word. Clara's voice was steady despite the churning in her stomach. Nathaniel, if this is going to damage your practice, it won't. You can't know that. I know that caving to bullies never works. They'll just find something else to attack. He moved past her toward his office. We keep working. Let them complain. But the pressure didn't stop. It intensified. Over the next week, 2 regular patients canceled their appointments, citing personal reasons. A woman who'd been coming in weekly for treatment of chronic headaches switched to Dr. Henderson in the next town despite the extra travel. The preacher's wife made a point of mentioning in Sunday service, Clara heard about it secondhand from Martha, that the community had a responsibility to maintain moral standards, especially in professions that involved caring for the vulnerable. Clara felt the weight of it pressing down like a physical thing. She started second-guessing herself during examinations, wondering if her diagnoses were correct or if she was missing something crucial. She caught herself hesitating before offering opinions to Nathaniel, afraid she'd overstep. The confidence she'd been building crumbled under the constant weight of scrutiny. Then Tommy Peterson came back. It was late afternoon, nearly closing time, when the boy's father burst through the door carrying Tommy in his arms. The boy was convulsing, his body rigid, foam at the corners of his mouth. Clara's training kicked in before thought could interfere. Put him on the examination table, gently. Nathaniel! She was already moving, clearing space, grabbing supplies. Nathaniel appeared from the back room, took one look, and started barking orders. Fever? Clara pressed her palm to Tommy's forehead. High, very high. When did the seizure start? 10 minutes ago, Peterson gasped. He woke up from a nap shaking, wouldn't stop. Infection, Clara said, her mind racing through possibilities. The head wound, did you keep it clean like I told you? Peterson's face went gray. We tried, but he kept picking at the bandage, and his mother thought fresh air would help the healing, so we let him play outside. The wound got contaminated. Clara was already unwrapping the bandage. The gash had turned angry red, the edges swollen and weeping pus. The infection had spread to the bloodstream, sepsis, possibly tetanus given the seizures. Fatal if untreated. Nathaniel, I see it. He was already preparing a syringe. Hold him steady. What followed was a blur of controlled urgency. Nathaniel administered antitoxin, drained the infected wound, cleaned it with carbolic acid while Tommy thrashed weakly on the table. Clara held the boy still, monitored his breathing, tracked the seizure patterns. They worked in absolute synchronization, each anticipating the other's needs, no wasted movement or words. It took 2 hours. 2 hours of fighting for Tommy's life while his father prayed in the corner and the winter darkness fell outside. But slowly, gradually, the seizures stopped. The fever broke. Tommy's breathing steadied into natural sleep. He'll live, Nathaniel said finally, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. But it was close. Another few hours and the infection would have spread too far. Peterson stumbled forward, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Thank you, God, thank you both." "Thank Clara," Nathaniel said quietly. "She's the one who recognized the infection pattern. If she hadn't acted immediately, we would have lost him." Peterson turned to Clara, and she saw something shift in his expression, from gratitude to recognition to shame. "Ma'am, I heard what people been saying about you, about it not being proper for you to work here. But you saved my boy's life, twice now. I don't care what anyone says, you're a real doctor in my book." Clara's throat tightened. "I'm just an assistant, Mr. Peterson. Dr. Webb did the hard work." "No," Nathaniel said. "We did it together. That's what good medicine looks like." They kept Tommy overnight for observation, his father sleeping in a chair beside the examination table. Clara checked on them every few hours between tending to the twins, and each time she found Tommy's condition improved. By morning, the boy was awake, weak but alert, asking for water and his mother. Peterson shook both their hands before leaving, pumping Clara's with almost painful intensity. "I'm going to tell everyone what you did, ma'am. Everyone. They need to know." And he did. By that afternoon, the story had spread through Riverdale like wildfire. Not the version Gideon Hale and his allies might have preferred, but the truth. The Peterson boy had been dying. Clara Hensley had recognized the infection. She and Dr. Webb had saved him. Facts, witnessed, and undeniable. The next morning, 3 patients who'd canceled appointments sheepishly rescheduled. The preacher's wife showed up with a donation of medical supplies and a mumbled apology. Even Eleanor Thornton appeared, albeit still stiff and formal, to ask if Clara might examine Lydia after all. The cough had worsened, and Dr. Henderson's treatments weren't helping. Clara examined the girl with Nathaniel observing, confirmed her initial suspicion of pneumonia, and prescribed bed rest and regular steam treatments with eucalyptus oil. Eleanor listened to the instructions without comment, paid the fee, and left. But at the door, she paused. "Mrs. Hensley," she said without turning around. "My daughter thanks you." It wasn't an apology, but it was acknowledgement, and for now, that was enough. That evening, after the practice closed and the twins were fed and sleeping, Clara found Nathaniel in his office reviewing case notes. She knocked on the doorframe and he looked up. "You should be resting," he said. "I wanted to thank you for defending me, for standing up to them." Nathaniel set down his pen. "You don't need to thank me for doing what's right." "Still," Clara hesitated. "I know this has cost you patience, reputation, peace of mind. I'm grateful you didn't give in." "Clara." Nathaniel stood, moved around the desk to face her. "Listen to me. What we're doing here, what you're learning, what you're becoming, it matters more than gossip or social pressure. You have a gift for medicine, a real gift. I'm not going to let small minds waste that because they're uncomfortable with a capable woman. But what if the medical board does investigate? What if they shut down the practice? Then we'll fight it. And if we lose, we'll find another way." He met her eyes, and his expression was serious but calm. "I didn't bring you into this lightly, Clara. I did it because I believed in your potential. Nothing that's happened has changed my mind. If anything, it's confirmed it." Clara felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back. "I won't let you down." "You haven't. You won't." He paused. "Now go get some sleep. We have a full schedule tomorrow, and I need my best assistant sharp." Clara nodded and turned to leave, but stopped at the door. "Nathaniel, why do you really do this? All of it. The teaching, the defending, the fighting with the town council. Why?" He was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight she hadn't heard before. "Because 5 years ago, my wife died from a fever that any competent physician could have treated, but we were living in a mining camp with no doctor, and by the time I got her to one, it was too late. I was studying medicine myself back then, but I didn't know enough yet. I couldn't save her." He looked at Clara. "I became a doctor so that no one else would have to watch someone they loved die from something preventable. And I'm teaching you for the same reason. Because the frontier needs more healers, not fewer. And because talent shouldn't be wasted just because it comes in an unexpected package." Clara's chest tightened. "I'm sorry about your wife. So am I, every day. Nathaniel's smile was sad. But I like to think she'd approve of what we're doing here. She always said the best way to honor the dead is to protect the living. She sounds like she was a wise woman. She was. You would have liked her. He turned back to his notes. Good night, Clara. Good night, Nathaniel. Upstairs, Clara checked on the twins one more time, then stood at the window looking out over the darkened town. Somewhere out there, people were still talking about her, still judging. But for the first time since arriving in Riverdale, Clara realized she didn't care. Let them talk. Let them whisper. She had work that mattered, skills that saved lives, and a purpose bigger than their small opinions. Tomorrow she'd wake up and do it all again. And the day after that, and the day after that, until the town ran out of breath for gossip, or ran out of reasons to doubt her. Whichever came first. She touched Thomas's ring on her finger, then looked at her other hand, the one that had held instruments tonight, that had helped save Tommy Peterson's life. Both hands had held love, but only one now held power, and Clara was just beginning to understand what she might build with it. Spring came to the Dakota Territory with the subtlety of a whisper turning into a shout. The snow melted in great rushing torrents that turned the streets into rivers of mud, and the prairie beyond town erupted in wildflowers that carpeted the earth in colors Clara had forgotten existed during the long gray winter. The twins were crawling now, getting into everything, their personalities emerging distinct and unmistakable. Lucy was cautious, observant, content to sit and study objects for long minutes before touching them. Samuel was fearless, launching himself at anything that caught his attention with a determination that left Clara constantly rescuing him from minor disasters. The practice had settled into a new equilibrium. After Tommy Peterson's recovery became common knowledge, the tide of public opinion shifted, not completely, but enough. Women who'd avoided the practice started returning, often requesting Clara specifically for examinations they found too embarrassing to discuss with a male physician. Nathaniel encouraged this, teaching Clara the specifics of women's health with the same clinical precision he brought to every other aspect of medicine. She learned to recognize the signs of difficult pregnancies, to treat infections and complications, to counsel women on matters their own mothers had never discussed with them. It was delicate work, intimate work, and Clara found herself becoming a trusted presence in ways that surprised her. But the opposition hadn't disappeared. It had simply changed tactics. The first warning came on a Tuesday morning in early April. Clara arrived at the practice to find Nathaniel standing in the doorway, a letter in his hand and his expression grim. He handed it to her without a word. The letterhead read Dakota Territorial Medical Board. Clara's stomach dropped as she scanned the contents. A formal inquiry had been opened regarding the employment of unqualified personnel in medical practices. Dr. Nathaniel Webb was required to appear before the board in Yankton within 30 days to address concerns about his medical assistant's credentials and the scope of her duties. Failure to appear would result in suspension of his medical license. Gideon, Clara said quietly, handing back the letter. He made good on his threat. Apparently. Nathaniel folded the letter and tucked it into his jacket. Though I'd wager Mayor Whitfield had a hand in it too. He sits on the Territorial Council and has connections to the medical board. What will you do? Appear before the board and explain that you're a capable assistant who works under my direct supervision, which is well within the bounds of accepted medical practice. Nathaniel's tone was matter-of-fact, but Clara heard the tension underneath. They can't object to you keeping records or preparing supplies. The question is whether they'll accept you assisting with actual medical procedures. And if they don't, then we adjust. You continue learning, but I handle all direct patient contact. He met her eyes. It's not ideal, but it wouldn't end your education. Clara felt frustration rise in her chest. So I'm supposed to hide what I can do because it makes people uncomfortable? You're supposed to survive the politics long enough to become indispensable. Once you've proven yourself beyond any doubt, the board won't be able to touch you without looking like fools. Nathaniel moved past her into the practice. It's not fair, Clara, but it's reality. The hearing was scheduled for May 2nd. Nathaniel spent the intervening weeks preparing his case, gathering testimonials from patients, documenting Clara's training, and the outcomes of cases she'd assisted with. Clara threw herself into work with renewed intensity, as if every successful diagnosis or treatment might somehow tip the scales in their favor. But beneath the determination ran a current of fear she couldn't quite suppress. What if the board ruled against them? What if Nathaniel lost his license because of her? The thought made her stomach churn. Martha noticed her anxiety during one of their regular tea visits. "You're going to worry yourself sick," she said, pouring Clara a second cup. "Nathaniel knows what he's doing. He wouldn't fight this battle if he thought he'd lose. He might lose because of me, because he's too stubborn to admit that hiring me was a mistake." "It wasn't a mistake, and you know it." Martha's tone was sharp. "You've helped dozens of people, Clara. You've learned more in 4 months than most people learn in years. The only mistake would be letting Gideon Hale and his cronies convince you otherwise. But what if the board agrees with them? What if they decide a woman can't be a medical assistant? Then Nathaniel will find another way to teach you. And you'll find another way to practice. Medicine isn't just what happens in that office, Clara. It's knowledge, skills. Those don't disappear because some bureaucrats write rules." Martha leaned forward. "Besides, you're not the only woman learning medicine on the frontier. There are female doctors now, even if they're rare. Dr. Susan Anderson in Colorado, Dr. Georgia Arbuckle Fix in Nebraska. They all faced opposition, and they all kept working. You can too." Clara wanted to believe her, but the weight of uncertainty pressed down like a physical thing, making everything harder. She snapped at Nathaniel during a procedure when he questioned her dosage calculation, even though he was right to check. She lost patience with Samuel when he knocked over a bottle of tincture, scolding him more harshly than the accident warranted. She lay awake at night listening to the twins breathe and wondering what would happen if she had to start over again in a new town with even less than she'd had when she arrived in Riverdale. Then, 3 weeks before the hearing, everything changed. It started with a ranch hand stumbling into the practice just after dawn, his arm wrapped in a blood-soaked handkerchief. Clara was alone. Nathaniel had ridden out to attend a difficult childbirth at a homestead 10 miles south, and she found herself facing the kind of emergency that left no room for doubt or hesitation. "Wire broke while we was mending fence," the ranch hand gasped. His name was Billy Crawford, barely 20, his face pale with shock and blood loss. "Tore right through my arm. Boss said to get to the doc quick." Clara got him onto the examination table, unwrapped the makeshift bandage, and felt her stomach drop. The wire had sliced through the muscle of his forearm, deep enough that she could see bone. Blood pulsed from the wound in rhythmic spurts, arterial bleeding, the kind that could kill a man in minutes, if not stopped. "Billy, listen to me." Clara forced her voice to stay calm even as her heart hammered. "I need to stop the bleeding. It's going to hurt, but you have to stay still. Can you do that?" "Where's the doc?" Billy's eyes were glazing with shock. "He's not here. But I am, and I know what to do. Trust me." Clara was already moving, grabbing supplies, her training overriding panic. Pressure first to slow the bleeding, then she'd need to find the severed artery and ligate it before she could suture the wound. She'd watched Nathaniel do this twice, had read about the procedure in 3 different texts, but she'd never done it herself. No time for doubt. Billy was going to die if she hesitated. Clara applied pressure above the wound, felt the spurting slow but not stop. The artery had retracted into the muscle tissue. She'd have to find it, pull it out, tie it off. Her hands were steady as she cleaned the wound, steadier than she'd expected, and she heard Nathaniel's voice in her head from 100 training sessions. "Think through each step before you start. Visualize the anatomy. Trust your knowledge." She visualized. The radial artery ran along the thumb side of the forearm, branching from the brachial artery at the elbow. If the wire had cut where she thought it had, she was looking for a vessel roughly 3 millimeters in diameter, probably retracted an inch or more into the surrounding tissue. She'd need to expose it carefully, avoid damaging the nerves that ran parallel, then ligate it with silk thread before closing the wound in layers. "Billy, I'm going to give you something for the pain. It'll make you sleepy, but you need to try to stay awake. Talk to me. Tell me about the ranch." She administered a careful dose of laudanum, enough to dull the pain, not enough to suppress his breathing, and then began to work. Billy talked in a rambling stream of consciousness about Tuttle and horses, and a girl named Mary he wanted to court, and Clara let his voice wash over her as she carefully dissected through layers of tissue, searching for the retracted artery. Blood made everything slippery, harder to see, but she worked methodically, dabbing away what she could, following the path of least resistance. There. A glimpse of darker red, pulsing faintly. She used a probe to gently tease out the severed end of the artery, her movements delicate as threading a needle. The vessel was damaged, but intact enough to ligate. She looped silk thread around it, pulled it tight, tied it off with hands that didn't shake. The pulsing stopped. The bleeding slowed to a manageable ooze. The hard part was over. Clara cleaned the wound thoroughly with carbolic acid, checking for debris or other damage. The muscle would heal if she sutured it in layers, bringing the tissue together without too much tension. She worked slowly, methodically, placing each stitch with care. Billy had gone quiet, the laudanum and shock pulling him toward sleep, but his breathing stayed steady and his color was improving. By the time Nathaniel returned 2 hours later, Clara had finished. Billy was sleeping on the examination table, his arm wrapped in clean bandages, his vital signs stable. Clara was washing instruments at the basin, her hands finally starting to tremble now that the crisis had passed. Nathaniel took one look at Billy, then at Clara, and his expression shifted through surprise to concern to something that might have been pride. "What happened?" Clara told him, her voice steady despite the shaking in her hands. Nathaniel examined Billy carefully, unwrapped the bandage to check her work, then rewrapped it without comment. When he finally turned back to Clara, his expression was serious. "You ligated an artery," he said quietly. "Alone. On your first try." "I didn't have a choice. He was bleeding out." "You had a choice. You could have panicked. You could have made mistakes. You could have killed him." Nathaniel crossed his arms. "Instead, you did everything exactly right. The ligature is perfect. The sutures are clean. You even remembered to check for nerve damage before closing." He paused. "Clara, do you understand what this means? That I got lucky? That you're not an assistant anymore. You're a physician. You just saved a man's life through skill and knowledge, not luck. That's what doctors do." Clara felt the words hit her like a physical impact. A physician. Not someone learning medicine, not someone helping. An actual physician. The enormity of it made her knees weak. She sat down hard on the nearest chair. "I was terrified," she whispered. "Good. Fear keeps you careful." Nathaniel pulled up another chair and sat facing her. "Clara, I'm going to make a formal recommendation to the medical board that you be registered as a medical apprentice. It's a legitimate category. You'd be working under my license, but with official recognition of your training and capabilities. It won't make you a licensed physician, but it would give you legal standing to practice medicine under supervision. Will they approve it? After this, I don't see how they can refuse. You've just demonstrated competency at a level most medical students don't reach until their second year of training." He leaned forward, "But I need to be clear with you about what this means. Once you're registered, you'll be held to the same standards as any physician. Your mistakes won't be excused because you're still learning. You'll be accountable." Clara thought about Billy Crawford's pale face, the blood pulsing from his arm, the weight of responsibility that had settled on her shoulders the moment Nathaniel wasn't there to take it. She'd carried that weight and hadn't crumbled. "I understand," she said. "I want this." "Then we move forward." Nathaniel stood. "I'll write the recommendation tonight and send it with my response to the board's inquiry. With Billy's case documented and Peterson's recovery on record, we have a strong argument." Over the next week, word of what Clara had done spread through Riverdale with the same speed as the earlier gossip, but with a different tenor. Billy Crawford told everyone who'd listen about the lady doc who'd saved his arm, maybe his life. His boss sent payment for the procedure with a note thanking Clara specifically. Other ranch hands started coming to the practice asking for Clara to treat their injuries, trusting that anyone who could handle Billy's emergency could handle their sprains and cuts and rope burns. The shift in atmosphere was palpable. Women who'd requested Clara for private examinations now recommended her to friends. Men who'd been skeptical began grudgingly admitting she knew her business. Even Eleanor Thornton managed a tight nod of acknowledgement when she passed Clara on the street. It wasn't universal acceptance. There were still those who disapproved on principle, but it was progress. Gideon Hale's expression when Clara encountered him at the post office was worth cataloging. He looked at her as though seeing a ghost, Someone who should have been broken and gone, but had instead persisted into something he couldn't categorize or dismiss. She met his gaze steadily, collected her mail, and left without a word. Some victories didn't need commentary. The hearing in Yankton took place on a gray morning in early May. Nathaniel left at dawn, carrying a folder thick with documentation and testimonials. Clara wanted to go with him, but couldn't. Someone needed to keep the practice running, and besides, the twins were too young for the journey. She spent the day in a state of nervous energy, seeing patients with half her attention, while the other half worried about what was happening 100 miles away. Martha stopped by at midday with sandwiches and moral support. "He'll manage," she said firmly. "Nathaniel's got a silver tongue when he needs it, and the evidence is on your side." Evidence doesn't always matter when prejudice is involved. No, but it helps. And Billy Crawford's arm helps even more. Hard to argue against results like that. Martha studied Claire's face. "You know, regardless of what the board decides, you've already won. You're practicing medicine. You're helping people. Nothing they say can take that away." Clara wanted to believe it, but the uncertainty gnawed at her through the afternoon and into the evening. She put the twins to bed, tried to read one of Nathaniel's medical texts, gave up and paced the floor instead. When she finally heard the sound of a horse on the street below, she was at the window so fast she nearly knocked over a lamp. Nathaniel dismounted slowly, his movements tired, and Clara's heart sank. Bad news, then. He'd lost. They'd shut down the practice or ordered Clara dismissed, but when he looked up and saw her at the window, he smiled. Clara met him at the door, unable to form words. Nathaniel handed her an official-looking document, sealed with the territorial seal, and waited while she opened it with shaking hands. "Certificate of Medical Apprenticeship," she read aloud. "Clara Hensley, under the supervision of Dr. Nathaniel Webb, licensed to practice general medicine and minor surgery within the Dakota Territory, subject to annual review and continued demonstration of competence." She looked up, stunned. "They approved it." "They approved it," Nathaniel confirmed, unanimously once they reviewed the case files. Billy Crawford's testimony in particular made an impression. The board chairman said, and I quote, "If Mrs. Hensley can perform an arterial ligation under emergency conditions without error, she's demonstrated greater competence than half the physicians in this territory." Clara felt tears spring to her eyes and didn't bother hiding them. "I can't believe it." "Believe it. You earned it." Nathaniel's smile widened. "There's more. The board is establishing new guidelines for medical apprenticeships, partly based on your case. They're creating a formal pathway for people, including women, to train as physicians without attending medical school. You're the first registered apprentice under the new system." The words seemed to echo in the small room. The first. A pathway that hadn't existed before, created partly because she'd refused to accept that her gender made her incapable. Clara thought of all the women who might follow, who might find this door slightly more open because she'd forced her way through it. The weight of that responsibility was enormous and exhilarating in equal measure. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you keep learning. You'll need to pass a competency examination each year to maintain your registration, which means we focus on expanding your knowledge. Obstetrics, surgery, internal medicine, all of it." Nathaniel's expression turned serious. "It won't be easy, Clara. The standards are high, and you'll be under more scrutiny than any male apprentice would face. Every mistake will be magnified. Every success will be attributed to luck or my training rather than your skill. You need to be prepared for that." "I am." Clara looked down at the certificate in her hands, at her name written in official ink on official paper. Proof that she existed, that she mattered, that she was more than a rejected mail-order bride or a woman of questionable reputation. "I've been preparing my whole life." The celebration was quiet, but heartfelt. Martha hosted a small dinner at the boarding house. Just Clara, Nathaniel, the twins, and a few close friends who'd supported Clara through the winter. Billy Crawford showed up with wildflowers and a shy smile, his arm healing well under the bandages. Even Pete, the grizzled ranch hand from Clara's first days at the practice, appeared with a bottle of whiskey and gruff congratulations. "Told you they'd come around," he said, raising his glass. "Town's got nothing but talk till someone proves 'em wrong. You proved 'em wrong." Clara raised her own glass. Martha had poured her a very small measure of whiskey over her protests, and felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with alcohol. This was what community felt like when it worked. Not everyone in Riverdale accepted her, not by a long shot, but enough did. Enough to matter. Late that night, after the twins were asleep and the practice was quiet, Clara stood at her window looking out over the town. The main street was dark except for lamplight spilling from the saloon and a few scattered houses. Somewhere out there, Gideon Hale was probably seething. Eleanor Thornton was probably disapproving. Mayor Whitfield was probably calculating his next move. Let them. Clara had her certificate. She had her skills. She had a future she was building with her own hands. A knock sounded on her door, the interior door that connected her quarters to the practice below. Clara opened it to find Nathaniel standing there, still dressed, but with his collar loosened and his hair mussed from running his hands through it. Sorry to disturb you. I wanted to make sure you understood something. He looked uncharacteristically uncertain. What happened today? Your registration? The board's approval? It changes things. You're not just my assistant anymore. You're my colleague. That means we work as equals, even if I have more experience. Your opinions carry the same weight as mine. Your decisions matter. I need you to understand that because I'm going to start treating you accordingly. Clara felt something shift in her chest. Equals. Not employer and employee. Not teacher and student. Equals. I understand, she said quietly. Thank you. Don't thank me. You earned it. Nathaniel paused, and something flickered across his face. An expression Clara couldn't quite read. Clara, I should tell you something. When I first offered you this position, it was partly because Martha asked me to help you, partly because I needed assistance, but also because... He stopped, seeming to search for words. Because when I looked at you that first morning, exhausted, abandoned, holding those babies with nothing but determination, I saw someone who reminded me of myself when I lost my wife. Someone who'd been broken by circumstance but refused to stay broken. I wanted to help because I understood what that felt like. Clara's throat tightened. Nathaniel? Let me finish. What I didn't expect was how good you'd be at this, how quickly you'd learn, how naturally healing comes to you. You've exceeded every expectation I had, and my expectations were already high. He met her eyes. I'm telling you this because I want you to know that whatever happens going forward, whether you stay here or eventually open your own practice or go to medical school, you've already succeeded. You're already a physician, regardless of what any board or license says, and I'm proud to have trained you. Clara felt tears threaten again and blinked them back. I couldn't have done any of this without you. Yes, you could have. It might have taken longer. The path might have been harder, but you would have found a way. Nathaniel's smile was gentle. That's who you are, Clara. You find ways. After he left, Clara sat on the edge of her bed for a long time, the certificate on the table beside her, Nathaniel's words echoing in her head. She thought about Thomas, about how proud he would have been to see what she'd become. She thought about the twins, sleeping peacefully in their cradle, and the future she was building for them. She thought about the girl she'd been when she stepped off that stagecoach in February, desperate, terrified, alone. That girl was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone capable, someone who'd earned the right to exist on her own terms. Clara Hensley, medical apprentice. It had a good sound to it, but as she lay down to sleep that night, another thought crept in unbidden. Nathaniel's expression when he'd stood at her door, the way his voice had softened when he talked about seeing himself in her. The way they worked together now, anticipating each other's movements, finishing each other's sentences. The way her heart had lifted when she'd seen him smile after the hearing. She pushed the thought away. Nathaniel was her colleague, her teacher, her friend. Nothing more. She had too much to lose, her position, her training, her hard-won respectability, to complicate things with feelings that couldn't go anywhere. Riverdale had barely accepted her as a medical apprentice. They'd never accept her as Nathaniel's wife, even if he wanted such a thing, which he probably didn't. He'd loved his wife, still mourned her, from the way he'd spoken about her. Clara was just someone he'd helped, someone who'd proven useful. That was all. But as she drifted towards sleep, Clara couldn't quite convince herself that the warmth in Nathaniel's eyes when he looked at her was purely professional, or that the flutter in her chest when he smiled was purely gratitude. Some thoughts were dangerous. Clara had survived winter in the Dakota Territory, survived rejection and gossip and a medical board inquiry. She could survive this too, this small, impossible wanting that had no place in the life she was trying to build. She'd survived worse, she'd survived this. Outside, the prairie wind whispered through new spring grass, carrying the scent of possibility and the promise of summer. Inside, two babies dreamed whatever babies dream, and a woman lay awake, wrestling with the terrifying realization that she might be falling in love with a man who'd given her everything except any indication he felt the same. Morning would come. Patients would need seeing. Medicine would need practicing. Life would continue, complicated and messy and full of questions Clara wasn't ready to answer. But for now, in the darkness, she let herself imagine, just for a moment, what it might feel like if Nathaniel looked at her not as a colleague or an apprentice, but as something more. What it might be like to build a life that wasn't just about survival, but about partnership, companionship, maybe even love. Then she pushed the thought away, rolled over, and tried to sleep. Some dreams were too dangerous to entertain, even in the dark. But dangerous dreams had a way of refusing to stay buried, and by summer, Clara found herself facing a truth she'd been avoiding since spring. She was in love with Nathaniel Webb, and the feeling was becoming harder to hide with each passing day. It showed in small ways she couldn't quite control, the way her pulse quickened when his hand brushed hers while passing instruments, the way she found herself watching him work, memorizing the concentrated furrow of his brow when he was thinking through a difficult diagnosis, the way his rare smiles had started to feel like sunlight breaking through clouds. She told herself it was gratitude, admiration, respect for a mentor. But late at night, when honesty was unavoidable, Clara knew better. Nathaniel seemed oblivious, which was both a relief and a different kind of pain. He treated her with the same professional courtesy as always, never crossing the boundaries he'd established that first day. They worked side by side through long summer days, handling everything from simple coughs to a logging accident that required Clara to amputate 2 crushed fingers, while Nathaniel managed a severe head injury on the second victim. The work was consuming, exhausting, exactly what Clara needed to keep her mind occupied. Except it didn't work. Because Nathaniel was always there, steady and competent, and maddeningly unaware of what his presence did to her composure. Martha noticed, of course. She had a gift for seeing what people tried to hide. One afternoon in late June, when Clara stopped by the boarding house to return a book she'd borrowed, Martha took one look at her face and poured 2 cups of tea without asking. "You're going to have to tell him eventually," Martha said, settling into her chair with the bluntness Clara had come to expect. "Tell him what?" Clara tried for innocence and failed spectacularly. "Don't insult my intelligence. You're in love with my brother-in-law. It's written all over your face every time someone mentions his name." Martha stirred sugar into her tea. "The question is what you're going to do about it." Clara felt heat flood her cheeks. "Nothing. I'm going to do nothing. Nathaniel is my colleague and my teacher, that's all." "Is that all you want it to be?" "What I want doesn't matter. I have my registration to think about, my reputation, the twins' future. If I complicate things with Nathaniel, I risk everything I've built." Clara wrapped her hands around her teacup. "Besides, he doesn't see me that way. He still loves his wife." "He loved his wife," Martha corrected gently. "Past tense. And yes, he'll always carry that loss, but that doesn't mean his heart stopped working 5 years ago." She leaned forward. "Clara, I've known Nathaniel since he married my sister's best friend. I watched him grieve. I watched him bury himself in work to avoid feeling anything, and I've watched him come back to life these past few months because of you. He's come back to life because the practice is thriving, because he has help, not because of me specifically. Keep telling yourself that if it helps you sleep at night, but I see the way he looks at you when you're not watching, and it's not the way a man looks at a colleague." Martha's expression softened. "I'm not saying you should throw yourself at him, but maybe consider that he might be fighting the same feelings you are. Maybe he's just as afraid of complicating things." Clara wanted to believe it, but wanting and believing were different things, and she'd learned the hard way not to build hopes on foundations that might crumble. So she thanked Martha for the tea, collected her twins, and went home to the room above the practice where she could keep her dangerous feelings safely contained. The breaking point came in July, during the town's Independence Day celebration. Riverdale went all out for the 4th, with a parade down Main Street, a picnic in the park, and fireworks after dark. Clara had planned to skip the festivities. Public gatherings still made her nervous despite her improved standing, but Nathaniel insisted. "You're a registered medical apprentice now. You belong here as much as anyone." He'd been cleaning instruments when he said it, his tone matter of fact. Besides, the twins should see the parade. Samuel will love the horses. So Clara found herself standing on the boardwalk with Lucy on her hip and Samuel in Nathaniel's arms, watching the parade pass. Cowboys on decorated horses, the volunteer fire brigade showing off their new pump wagon, children waving flags, the mayor and town council riding in an open carriage. Gideon Hale was among them, looking prosperous and self-satisfied, and when his eyes met Clara's, she saw him falter slightly before recovering his composure. She met his gaze steadily until he looked away first. "Small victories," Nathaniel murmured beside her, having caught the exchange. Samuel grabbed at his hat, and Nathaniel adjusted his grip with the easy competence of someone comfortable with children. The sight did something complicated to Clara's heart. After the parade came the picnic. Martha had packed enough food for an army and spread it under a large cottonwood tree at the edge of the park. Billy Crawford stopped by to show off his healed arm and introduce the girl Mary he'd been courting. Pete brought fresh berries from his garden. Even Eleanor Thornton approached, stiff but civil, to thank Clara for her continued care of Lydia, whose pneumonia had fully resolved. "You've been good for this town," Eleanor said, the words clearly costing her some effort. "I may not approve of all your methods, but I can't argue with your results." It wasn't friendship, but it was acknowledgement. Clara accepted it with grace and watched Eleanor retreat to join the other society matrons, their heads already together in conversation. Let them talk. Clara had stopped trying to control what people said about her months ago. The afternoon drifted into evening with a lazy summer ease. The twins played in the grass under Martha's watchful eye, while Clara and Nathaniel sat in companionable silence, watching the light turn gold and long. Other families spread around the park, children running and playing, couples walking arm in arm. It felt almost domestic, almost like they were a family themselves instead of a widow and a widower brought together by circumstance. "Clara," Nathaniel said suddenly, breaking the comfortable quiet. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." He was quiet for a moment, as though choosing his words carefully. "Do you ever think about marrying again?" The question struck like lightning, unexpected and electrifying. Clara's throat went dry. Sometimes. Why?" "Because you're young, capable. The twins deserve a father, and you deserve a partner." Nathaniel wasn't looking at her, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I know what happened with Gideon Hale was terrible, but not all men are like him. Someone worthy of you could give you the life you deserve." Clara felt something crack inside her chest. He was encouraging her to find someone else, to marry, to move on, which meant he didn't see her as anything more than a colleague, didn't feel what she felt, didn't. "What about you?" The words came out sharper than she intended. "Do you ever think about marrying again?" Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "Sometimes." And I tell myself I'm too set in my ways, too focused on work, too—" He trailed off, then shook his head. "It doesn't matter. We were talking about you." "No, we were talking about both of us. You just decided your answer doesn't matter." Clara surprised herself with her boldness, but the hurt was making her reckless. "You're allowed to want companionship, Nathaniel. You're allowed to want more than work and loneliness." "I'm not lonely." But his tone lacked conviction. "Neither am I," Clara lied. "I have the twins, I have my work, I have friends. That's enough." They sat in tense silence until Martha called them over for cake, and the moment passed without resolution. But something had shifted between them, a crack in the careful professional distance they'd maintained. Clara felt it like a physical thing, uncomfortable and impossible to ignore. The fireworks started at full dark, bright explosions against the black sky that made Samuel shriek with delight and Lucy bury her face in Clara's shoulder. The crowd oohed and awed with each burst of color, and in the flickering light, Clara caught Nathaniel watching her instead of the sky. When their eyes met, he didn't look away immediately. The moment stretched, heavy with something unspoken, until another firework exploded and broke the spell. Walking home after, with the twins drowsy in their arms and the smell of gunpowder still in the air, neither of them spoke. The silence felt different from their usual comfortable quiet, charged, fragile, like glass under pressure. Clara wanted to say something, anything, to ease the tension, but every word that came to mind felt either too revealing or too trivial, so she said nothing at all. At the practice, Nathaniel helped her carry the twins upstairs. Lucy had fallen completely asleep, and Samuel was close behind. They settled the babies in their cradle with the practice coordination of people who'd done this 100 times and then stood facing each other in the small room with nothing left to do and too much left unsaid. Clara, Nathaniel started. I should let you get some rest, Clara interrupted, unable to hear whatever he was about to say. If it was more talk about her finding someone else, about moving on, about building a life that didn't include him, she couldn't bear it. Thank you for today. The twins had a wonderful time. Clara, wait. Nathaniel caught her arm gently as she turned away. I need to tell you something. Her heart was hammering so hard she was sure he could hear it. What? When I said you deserve someone worthy of you, I wasn't suggesting you settle for just anyone. I meant... He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. I meant someone who sees you, who understands what you've overcome and what you're capable of. Someone who knows how rare you are. Clara's breath caught. Nathaniel? I'm saying this badly. His hand was still on her arm and she could feel the warmth of it through her sleeve. What I'm trying to say is that you've changed my life, Clara. You've brought light back into this practice, into this town, into my... He stopped again and something vulnerable crossed his face. I told myself I was just being a good teacher, just helping a colleague. But the truth is I look forward to seeing you every morning. I think about you when we're apart. And when you smile at me after we've saved someone, I feel alive in a way I haven't felt in years. The world seemed to narrow to just the two of them, this small room, this fragile moment. You're my teacher, Clara whispered. My colleague. We can't... I know all the reasons why this is complicated. Your reputation, your registration, the town gossip. I've listed them all to myself 100 times. Nathaniel's voice was rough. But I can't keep pretending I only see you as an apprentice when the truth is so much more than that. Clara felt tears sting her eyes. What truth? That I've fallen in love with you. The words were quiet but certain. That I want to build a life with you, not just a medical practice. That when I imagine my future, you're in it, you and the twins. He released her arm, stepped back slightly. But I won't pressure you. If you don't feel the same way, we can pretend this conversation never happened. We can go back to being colleagues and nothing more. I just needed you to know. For a long moment, Clara couldn't speak, couldn't move. All the feelings she had been suppressing for months flooded through her. Joy and terror and hope and fear all tangled together in a knot she couldn't untangle. Nathaniel was watching her with an expression so open, so vulnerable, that it broke something in her chest. I'm terrified, she finally said. Of me? Of this? Of wanting something and losing it again, of building a life and having it collapse. Clara's voice shook. I lost Thomas. I almost lost the twins. I've been rejected and humiliated and left with nothing. The idea of risking that again, of letting myself love someone and maybe losing them. I'm terrified too, Nathaniel interrupted gently. I lost Sarah. I know what that kind of grief feels like. And yes, the idea of loving someone again, of being vulnerable again, scares me to death. He moved closer, his eyes never leaving hers. But I'm more afraid of letting you go without telling you how I feel. More afraid of spending the rest of my life wondering what might have been if I'd just been brave enough to be honest. Clara felt tears slip down her cheeks. I love you too, she whispered. I've been fighting it for months, but I love you. And that terrifies me. Nathaniel's expression softened into something that looked like relief and wonder combined. He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed the tears from her cheeks with his thumbs. Then we'll be terrified together. We'll build something slowly, carefully. No rushing, no risks we're not ready for. Just honesty, partnership. Two people who understand loss choosing hope anyway. The town will talk. Let them. They've been talking about us for months anyway. Might as well give them something real to discuss. His smile was tentative. Clara, I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow. I'm just asking if you're willing to try, to see if what we have could become something more. Clara thought about all the reasons she should say no, about her hard-won respectability, her registration, her duty to the twins, about the practical concerns and the emotional risks, about everything that could go wrong. Then she thought about Nathaniel's steady presence through the worst winter of her life, about working beside him day after day, learning to trust his judgment and her own, about the way he defended her to the town council, taught her medicine when others said a woman couldn't learn, believed in her when she'd barely believed in herself, about the way he looked at her twins with genuine affection, the way he'd slowly become part of their small family without either of them quite realizing it, about the way her heart lifted when she saw him, the way the world felt steadier when he was near. "Yes," she said, "I'm willing to try." Nathaniel's smile was like dawn breaking. He leaned forward slowly, telegraphing his intention, and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. Not her lips. That would come later, when they were ready, when the time was right. Just a tender gesture that felt like a promise. "We'll figure out the details together," he said quietly. "But whatever happens, you're not alone anymore, Clara. Neither of us is." The next few weeks brought a shift that was both subtle and profound. To the outside world, nothing changed. Clara and Nathaniel continued working side by side, maintaining professional boundaries in public. But in private, the walls had come down. They talked more freely about their pasts, their fears, their hopes for the future. Nathaniel told Clara about Sarah's illness, about the helplessness he'd felt watching her die. Clara told him about Thomas's last days, about the poverty that had followed, about the desperation that had driven her to answer Gideon Hale's letter. "I thought marrying Gideon was my only option," she said one evening as they sat in the practice office after the twins had gone to sleep. "I thought I needed a man to save me, to give me a place in the world." "And now?" Nathaniel asked. "Now I know I can save myself. I did save myself. You helped, yes, but the strength came from me. The determination to learn, to fight, to refuse to give up, that was mine." She met his eyes. "Which means if I choose to build a life with you, it won't be because I need you to rescue me. It'll be because I want to share what I've built with someone who sees me as an equal." "That's all I've ever wanted." Nathaniel reached across the desk and took her hand. "Partnership, Clara. Not rescue, not dependence. Just two people choosing to face life together because it's better that way." But Riverdale, predictably, had other ideas about partnership between a widower doctor and his female apprentice. The rumors started in August, whispered at first, then spoken more openly. People claimed to have seen Nathaniel and Clara standing too close, talking too intimately, behaving in ways that suggested their relationship wasn't purely professional. Most of it was fabrication or wild exaggeration, but some of it had kernels of truth. They had grown closer. They did share meals sometimes. Nathaniel had been seen playing with the twins in the park. To minds primed for scandal, evidence of impropriety was everywhere. The crisis came to a head on a sweltering afternoon in late August. Clara was examining a pregnant woman, her third of the day, when Gideon Hale walked into the practice with Mayor Whitfield and Charles Thornton flanking him like an official delegation. Nathaniel was out on a house call, which Clara suspected wasn't coincidental. "Mrs. Hensley," Gideon said with false civility, "we need to speak with you." Clara excused herself from her patient and met the men in the waiting room, her spine straight. "Gentlemen, what can I do for you?" "It's come to our attention that your relationship with Dr. Webb may have become inappropriate," Mayor Whitfield said, trying for diplomatic and landing on condescending. "As members of the town council, we feel obligated to address concerns about the moral standards being maintained in our community's medical practice." Clara felt ice settle in her stomach, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm not sure what you're suggesting, Mayor, but I can assure you that Dr. Webb and I maintain complete professionalism. I'm a registered medical apprentice working under his supervision, nothing more." "Nothing more?" Gideon's smile was sharp. "Then perhaps you can explain why multiple townspeople have reported seeing you and Dr. Webb in circumstances that suggest a more intimate relationship, late-night conversations, shared meals, familiarity with your children that exceeds professional necessity." Dr. Webb has been kind to my children. That's hardly a crime. No, but living in sin under the guise of professional collaboration certainly skirts the boundaries of acceptable behavior. Charles Thornton stepped forward, his expression stern. Mrs. Hensley, we're prepared to file a complaint with the Territorial Medical Board regarding the improper nature of your working arrangement. Unless, of course, you're willing to resign your position and leave Riverdale voluntarily. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Clara's mind raced through possibilities. They couldn't prove anything because there was nothing improper to prove. But mud stuck regardless of truth, and a second board investigation would damage both her reputation and Nathaniel's practice. Even if they won, the cost would be high. You're asking me to leave town because you don't approve of me, Clara said quietly. That's what this is really about, isn't it? Not morality, not professional standards. You just can't accept that a woman can work as a physician without being somehow corrupt. We can't accept that a woman of your background can be trusted in a position of authority over the health of our families, Gideon corrected. You arrived here as an abandoned mail-order bride with illegitimate children. My children are not illegitimate. Clara's voice cracked like a whip. My husband died. I'm a widow. And my personal history has no bearing on my medical competence, which has been proven repeatedly over the past 7 months. Your medical competence isn't the issue. Then what is? Clara stepped closer, her fear transforming into fury. That I refused to disappear when you rejected me? That I built something instead of starving quietly? That I proved women can learn medicine and practice it well? Which part of my success offends you most, Mr. Hale? Gideon's face flushed. Your arrogance offends me, Mrs. Hensley. Your presumption that you belong in a profession meant for educated men. Your willingness to compromise Dr. Webb's reputation for your own advancement. I haven't compromised anything. And if you file your complaint, the medical board will find exactly what they found in May, that I'm a competent apprentice working under proper supervision. You'll achieve nothing except wasting everyone's time. We'll see about that. Mayor Whitfield tried to regain control of the conversation. Mrs. Hensley, I'd advise you to consider your position carefully. Riverdale is a small town. If the community loses faith in your character, your ability to practice medicine here ends regardless of what the board decides. Sometimes the wise choice is to accept defeat gracefully. I haven't been defeated. Clara met each man's eyes in turn. And I'm not leaving. File your complaint if you want. Spread your rumors. I'll face them the same way I've faced everything else, with truth and competence and the support of the people I've actually helped. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a patient waiting. She turned back toward the examination room before they could respond, her hands shaking but her head high. Behind her, she heard them leaving, their voices low and angry. She'd made enemies today, powerful ones, but she'd also drawn a line. They couldn't force her out, not without a fight. When Nathaniel returned an hour later, Clara was finishing with her patient, her professional mask firmly in place. But he took one look at her face when the woman left and knew something had happened. Tell me, he said simply. Clara told him everything. About the delegation, the accusations, the threat to file another complaint, about Gideon's insults and the mayor's attempt at intimidation. Nathaniel listened without interrupting, his expression growing progressively darker. They came when they knew I'd be out, he said when she finished. They ambushed you deliberately. I handled it. I know you did, but you shouldn't have to. Nathaniel began pacing, his anger evident. This has gone on long enough. I'm tired of them using you to get at me, tired of them hiding behind morality to excuse their prejudice. There's nothing we can do except keep working and let them waste their energy on complaints that won't go anywhere. There's something else we could do. Nathaniel stopped pacing and faced her. We could get married. Clara's heart stuttered. What? Marry me, not in 6 months or a year when we're sure. Now, this week. His voice was urgent, intense. Think about it, Clara. If we're married, they have no grounds for complaint. No accusations of impropriety can stick. Your position becomes unassailable because you'd be my wife as well as my colleague. It solves everything. Marriage to solve a political problem? Clara heard her voice come out thin. That's not a reason to marry, Nathaniel. It's not the only reason. He moved closer, his expression softening. I love you. I want to build a life with you. I want to be a father to the twins. The fact that marrying would also protect us from small-minded gossip is just practical. But the real reason is that I want to spend the rest of my life with you, Clara. And if we're going to do that anyway, why not now? Why give them more time to make our lives difficult? Clara wanted to say yes so badly it hurt, but something held her back. This feels rushed, like we're letting them force our hand. We're not letting them force anything. We're choosing to fight back on our own terms. Nathaniel took her hands. Clara, I understand if you need more time. But if the only thing holding you back is fear of seeming like we're reacting to pressure, then I'd argue we should do what's right for us regardless of their timing. We know how we feel. We know what we want. The rest is just logistics. Clara thought about the look in Gideon Hale's eyes when he'd threatened her, about the satisfaction he'd shown at the prospect of driving her out of town, about how her departure would be seen as proof that women couldn't handle the rigors of frontier medicine, that they belonged in homes and schools, but never in practices. Then she thought about Nathaniel's steady presence through every crisis, about the way he'd taught her, defended her, loved her, about the life they'd been building piece by piece, slowly and carefully, about the twins, who lit up when Nathaniel walked into a room, who already saw him as part of their family. Ask me properly, she said quietly. Nathaniel's expression transformed. He released her hands, then dropped to one knee right there in the examination room, in the place where they'd saved lives together, where they'd become partners in every way that mattered except one. Clara Hensley, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not because it's practical or strategic, but because I love you and I want to spend every day of my life working beside you, learning with you, raising the twins together, because you make me believe in futures again. Because when I imagine growing old, I imagine growing old with you. He paused. Will you marry me? Clara felt tears spill down her cheeks, but for once they were tears of joy instead of grief. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. Nathaniel stood and kissed her then, properly this time, his hands gentle on her face. The kiss was sweet and tender and full of promise, and Clara felt something fundamental shift inside her. This was what partnership felt like. This was what choosing hope looked like. They married 3 days later in a ceremony so simple it might have been scandalous if it weren't so clearly heartfelt. Martha stood as witness, along with Billy Crawford and his girl Mary. The preacher, a young man new to Riverdale who hadn't yet absorbed the town's prejudices, performed the service in the small church, and Clara wore a dress Martha had helped her alter from one of her old Sunday bests. Lucy and Samuel sat in Martha's lap, remarkably well behaved, as Clara and Nathaniel exchanged vows. I promise to be your partner in medicine and in life, Nathaniel said, holding both her hands in his, to respect your knowledge and your strength, to support your dreams, to be a father to your children, to love you in sickness and health, for better or worse, for as long as we both live. Clara's voice shook when she responded, but the words came clear. I promise to stand beside you as an equal, to share the burdens and the joys, to keep learning and growing, to love your memory of Sarah without jealousy, and to build something new together, to be your wife and your colleague, your partner in every way, to love you for as long as we both live. They exchanged simple gold bands. Clara's husband's ring moved to her right hand, Nathaniel's late wife's ring kept in a box at home. New symbols for a new beginning. When the preacher pronounced them married, Martha wept openly, and even Billy Crawford looked suspiciously misty-eyed. The celebration afterward was small but joyful. Martha had prepared a wedding supper, and they ate together in the boarding house parlor, sharing stories and laughter. No one from the town council attended, no one from high society. Just the people who mattered, the ones who'd supported Clara and Nathaniel through the hardest seasons. That night, Clara moved her few belongings from the room above the practice into Nathaniel's quarters, the house adjacent to the practice that she'd never entered before. It was modest but comfortable, and Nathaniel had cleared space for her things with a care that made her throat tight. He'd set up a proper nursery for the twins with 2 cribs instead of 1 cradle, painted pale yellow with curtains Martha had sewn. I wanted them to have their own space, Nathaniel said, watching Clara settle the babies. Wanted you to know this is your home now, all of yours. Clara kissed him, soft and lingering. Thank you for all of it. They lay awake late that night, talking quietly while the twins slept in the next room, about their shared future, the practice they'd build together, the family they'd become, about how they'd face whatever came next as partners, equals, husband and wife. We're going to scandalize them tomorrow, Clara said, her head on Nathaniel's shoulder. Showing up as Dr. and Mrs. Webb. Let them be scandalized. We'll be too busy working to care. And they were. When word spread that Clara and Nathaniel had married, Riverdale erupted in exactly the gossip they'd expected. Some claimed it proved the impropriety all along. Others insisted Nathaniel had been forced to marry Clara to preserve his reputation. A few said it was romantic. Most just talked because talking was what Riverdale did best. But in the practice, nothing changed except the names on the sign, Dr. Nathaniel Webb and Dr. Clara Webb, because Nathaniel insisted on including her title, even though technically she was still an apprentice. They worked side by side as they always had, seeing patients, saving lives, teaching each other. The only difference was the gold band on Clara's finger and the knowledge that when the day ended, they'd go home together. To a house that was theirs, to a life they were building deliberately, carefully, with full knowledge of what they were choosing. Gideon Hale's complaint to the medical board was filed and promptly dismissed. A married woman working in her husband's practice was beyond reproach, even on the frontier. The town council muttered, but could do nothing. And slowly, grudgingly, Riverdale began to accept that Dr. Clara Webb wasn't going anywhere. She'd found her place, not through marriage as salvation, but through competence, courage, and the refusal to accept that her gender made her lesser. The marriage was bonus, partnership chosen freely, love earned through shared struggle, family built from rejection transformed into purpose. On a warm evening in early September, Clara stood at the window of her new home watching the sun set over the prairie. Nathaniel came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, and they stood together in comfortable silence. The twins were asleep. The practice was closed. Tomorrow would bring new patients, new challenges, new opportunities to prove themselves. But tonight was theirs, a moment of peace in lives that rarely offered it. And Clara realized she was happy. Truly, completely happy. Not the desperate happiness of survival, but the deep contentment of belonging, of being seen and valued, of having fought for something and won. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For seeing me when no one else did. For giving me a chance. Nathaniel kissed her temple. You gave yourself the chance, Clara. I just had the good sense not to waste it. The rest was all you. And maybe, Clara thought, that was the real story. Not about a man who saved her, but about a woman who saved herself. Who'd stepped off a stagecoach with nothing but babies and determination and built a life worth living. Who'd taken rejection and turned it into expertise. Who'd faced down prejudice and proven that competence had no gender. The marriage was real and precious. But it wasn't the ending. It was just the beginning of the next chapter. And Clara couldn't wait to see what she'd build next. The next chapter arrived sooner than Clara expected, and it came wrapped in winter cold and the kind of challenge that would test everything she'd built. November brought the first real snow, heavy and relentless, blanketing Riverdale in white that turned the streets into impassable drifts. The practice stayed busy with frostbite cases, pneumonia, injuries from people trying to navigate the treacherous conditions. Clara and Nathaniel worked 14-hour days, barely stopping to eat, while Martha looked after the twins with the competence of a woman who'd raised children through worse. Then came the night that changed everything. It was past midnight when the pounding started on the door, desperate, urgent, the kind of knocking that meant life or death. Nathaniel was already up and moving before Clara had fully woken, pulling on his coat as he headed downstairs. Clara followed, her medical instincts overriding exhaustion, and found a young man she didn't recognize standing in their doorway, covered in snow and panic. "It's the Peterson place," he gasped. "The whole family's sick, real sick. Mrs. Peterson sent me to fetch the doc before—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "Before it's too late." Clara felt ice settle in her stomach that had nothing to do with the open door. The Petersons had 6 children, Tommy being the oldest. If the whole family was ill, it meant something contagious, something serious. What are the symptoms? Nathaniel was already gathering supplies, his movements efficient despite the hour. "Fever," Terrible fever, and the younger ones are having fits, like Tommy did that time. Mrs. Peterson's beside herself. Mr. Peterson can barely stand up. He's so weak. Nathaniel and Clara exchanged a look. Fits meant possible infection, possibly the same kind that had nearly killed Tommy. But affecting an entire family suggested something environmental or epidemic. Either way, they needed to move fast. I'm coming with you, Clara said, already reaching for her medical bag. The snow's bad. The ride will be dangerous. Then it's good there'll be two of us. Clara was pulling on her warmest coat, her boots. If it's as bad as he says, you'll need help. We waste time arguing. We waste lives. Nathaniel didn't argue further. They left word with Martha, who'd come downstairs at the commotion, and rode out into the blizzard with the young messenger leading the way. The wind cut like knives, and the snow was so thick Clara could barely see Nathaniel riding ahead of her. But she kept her horse moving, kept her focus on the task ahead. The Peterson family needed them. Everything else was secondary. The ride took an hour through conditions that should have made it impossible. By the time they reached the Peterson homestead, Clara's face was numb and her hands ached from gripping the reins. But she dismounted smoothly, grabbed her bag, and followed Nathaniel into the house. The scene inside was nightmarish. All 6 children were laid out in the main room, their small bodies shaking with fever. Mrs. Peterson sat among them looking haggard and terrified, trying to cool them with wet cloths while her husband slumped in a chair, barely conscious. The air smelled of sickness and desperation. "Thank heaven you came," Mrs. Peterson sobbed. "I didn't know what else to do. They just kept getting sicker and sicker." "When did the symptoms start?" Clara was already examining the nearest child, a girl of about 5. High fever, rapid pulse, the beginning of a rash on her torso. Her mind raced through possibilities. 2 days ago, with the youngest. Then it spread to the others. My husband got it yesterday. Mrs. Peterson wrung her hands. "Is it the same infection Tommy had? Did we do something wrong?" "It's not your fault." Nathaniel was checking Mr. Peterson, his expression grim. "Clara, look at this rash pattern." Clara moved to see what he was indicating. The rash was distinctive, small red spots that didn't blanch when pressed. Her medical training clicked into place, and she felt her stomach drop. "Scarlet fever." "I think so too." Nathaniel's voice was tight. "Which means we need to act fast. It's contagious. It's already spread through the whole family, and if we don't get the fevers down, the complications could be fatal." They worked through the night in perfect synchronization. Clara prepared cooling baths while Nathaniel administered medications. They took turns monitoring vital signs, adjusting treatments, keeping the children hydrated. Mrs. Peterson helped where she could, following their instructions with desperate precision. The hours blurred together, checking temperatures, changing wet cloths, coaxing small sips of water past cracked lips. The youngest child, a boy of 3, went into convulsions just before dawn. Clara grabbed him, held him steady while Nathaniel administered medication to stop the seizure. For terrible minutes, the boy thrashed in her arms, and Clara felt the weight of responsibility crushing down. If they lost him, if they lost any of them, it would devastate this family, would devastate her. But slowly, gradually, the seizure stopped. The boy's breathing steadied. His fever began to drop as the medication took effect. Clara held him until she was sure he was stable, then gently transferred him back to his pallet. "Good work," Nathaniel said quietly. He looked as exhausted as Clara felt, his shirt stained with sweat and medicine, his hair disheveled, but his eyes were clear, focused. "The worst is passing. If we can keep their fevers controlled for the next 12 hours, they should pull through. And Mr. Peterson? He's strong. He'll recover." Nathaniel glanced at Mrs. Peterson, who'd finally fallen asleep in a chair, exhausted beyond endurance. "But they all need monitoring. We can't leave yet." So they stayed. Through the morning and into the afternoon, taking turns resting while the other kept watch. Clara dozed fitfully in a chair, waking every hour to check on patients, then drifting off again. When she woke the 3rd time, she found Nathaniel sitting beside her, watching the children sleep with an expression that made her chest tight. "What are you thinking?" she asked quietly. "That this is what we're meant to do. Not just medicine in a comfortable practice, but this, going where we're needed, even when it's hard. especially when it's hard. He looked at her. You were magnificent tonight, Clara. The way you handled that seizure, the way you stayed calm when things got desperate, you saved that boy's life. We saved him. Together. Yes, together. Nathaniel's smile was tired but genuine. That's how it's supposed to work. By evening, all 6 children were out of danger, their fevers broken, their breathing steady. Mr. Peterson was sitting up, weak but alert. Mrs. Peterson wept with relief when Nathaniel told her they'd all recover fully with rest and continued care. I don't know how to thank you, she said, gripping Clara's hands. Both of you, you saved my babies. That's what we're here for, Clara said gently. But Mrs. Peterson, you need to understand, scarlet fever is highly contagious. We need to quarantine your family for at least 2 weeks. No visitors, no contact with town. And if anyone else shows symptoms, send word immediately. I will, I promise. Mrs. Peterson looked at Clara with something like awe. You're a real doctor, aren't you? Not just helping. You're a real doctor. Clara glanced at Nathaniel, who nodded encouragingly. I'm a medical apprentice, but yes, I practice medicine, and I'll keep practicing it for as long as people need help. The ride back to Riverdale was easier, the snow having stopped and the path more visible in daylight. But Clara and Nathaniel were both exhausted beyond words. They made it home, checked on the twins, who Martha reported had been perfect angels, and collapsed into bed without even removing their boots. Clara was asleep before her head hit the pillow, too tired to dream, too depleted to do anything but rest. She woke 12 hours later to find Nathaniel already up, examining her with professional concern. How do you feel? Like I was trampled by horses. Why? Because we were both exposed to scarlet fever for 12 hours straight. I need to make sure we're not infected. His hands were gentle as he checked her temperature, examined her throat, looked for signs of rash. You're clear so far, but we need to monitor ourselves carefully for the next week. Clara submitted to the examination, then insisted on checking him as well. They were both healthy, both lucky, but the reminder of their vulnerability lingered. They'd saved the Peterson family, but they'd also put themselves at risk. That was the cost of frontier medicine, the constant exposure, the danger inherent in every house call, every emergency. Word of what they'd done spread through Riverdale faster than the disease they'd treated. The story grew in the telling, how the doctors had ridden through a blizzard to save 6 children from death's door, how they'd worked through the night without rest, how Clara had stopped a seizure with her bare hands and refused to leave until every patient was stable. Some of it was exaggeration, but the core was true, and Riverdale, despite its prejudices, understood heroism when it saw it. The shift in public opinion was subtle but unmistakable. Women who'd been coolly polite began bringing gifts to the practice, fresh bread, preserves, knitted items for the twins. Men who'd questioned Clara's competence now tipped their hats when she passed. Even the town council seemed subdued, as though recognizing that opposing her now would look petty in light of what she'd accomplished. But the real test came 2 weeks later, when Mayor Whitfield appeared at the practice with an unexpected request. Nathaniel was out on a house call, leaving Clara to receive him alone. She braced herself for another confrontation, another attempt to undermine her position. Instead, Whitfield removed his hat and looked almost uncomfortable. Dr. Webb, Mrs. Webb, I need to speak with you about a matter of some delicacy. What kind of matter? My wife is pregnant. She's had 3 miscarriages in the past 5 years, and she's terrified this one won't carry to term either. Whitfield's usual bluster was gone, replaced by raw worry. She won't see a male physician. Says she's too embarrassed to discuss the details with a man, even Dr. Webb, but she's heard about your work with other women, and she asked if you might be willing to examine her. Clara felt surprise ripple through her. The mayor's wife, seeking her help. The same mayor who'd tried to force her out of town just months ago. Of course I'll see her. When would she like to come in? Could you come to our home instead? She's on bed rest, and I don't want her traveling in this cold. Whitfield twisted his hat in his hands. I know I haven't been kind to you in the past, Mrs. Webb. I was wrong about your abilities. I let prejudice cloud my judgment. But my wife's health matters more than my pride. If you can help her, I'm asking you to put aside what I've done and treat her anyway. It would have been easy to refuse, to point out his hypocrisy, to make him feel the weight of his previous actions. But Clara thought about the mayor's wife, frightened and desperate for help, about the baby she was trying to carry, about the oath Clara had taken in her heart, if not officially, to help those who needed it, regardless of politics or personal feelings. "I'll come this afternoon," she said quietly. "And Mayor Whitfield, I don't hold grudges. I just do my work." The examination of Mrs. Whitfield revealed what Clara had suspected, a weakened cervix that made carrying pregnancy to term difficult. It was a condition she'd read about in Nathaniel's texts, one that required bed rest, specific positioning, and careful monitoring. She explained the treatment plan to Mrs. Whitfield with patience and compassion, answering every anxious question, providing reassurance where she honestly could. "Can you save my baby?" Mrs. Whitfield asked, tears streaming down her face. "I can give you the best possible chance," Clara said, taking her hand. "But you need to follow the treatment plan exactly. No exceptions, and I'll check on you weekly until the birth." Over the next months, Clara did exactly that. She visited Mrs. Whitfield every week, monitoring the pregnancy's progress, adjusting the treatment as needed. She taught the mayor's wife exercises to strengthen her body, positions that reduced pressure on the cervix, warning signs to watch for. And slowly, week by week, the pregnancy progressed further than any of Mrs. Whitfield's previous attempts. Mayor Whitfield watched his wife's belly grow with wonder and gratitude that transformed his entire demeanor toward Clara. He began defending her in town council meetings, shutting down gossip with sharp words about her competence and dedication. He made sure everyone knew that Dr. Clara Webb was keeping his wife and unborn child alive. "I misjudged you," he told Clara during one of her visits. "I thought women couldn't handle the rigors of medicine. I was a fool." "You were taught to think that way," Clara said charitably. "Most men are, but you're learning differently now. That takes courage, too." In March, Mrs. Whitfield went into labor, 3 weeks early but within safe parameters. Clara and Nathaniel attended the birth together, working in the seamless partnership they'd developed over months of practice. The labor was long and difficult, but Mrs. Whitfield was strong, and Clara's careful monitoring throughout the pregnancy had prepared her body for this moment. When the baby, a healthy girl, finally emerged screaming into the world, Mrs. Whitfield sobbed with relief and joy. "You saved her," she kept saying, clutching Clara's hand. "You saved both of us." "You did the hard work," Clara said gently. "I just guided you through it." But Riverdale saw it differently. The mayor's daughter, alive because of Clara's skill and care. The story spread like wildfire, and this time even the most stubborn skeptics had to acknowledge the truth. Dr. Clara Webb wasn't just competent, she was exceptional. She'd proven it over and over, saving lives that might have been lost, treating conditions other physicians had deemed hopeless. The tide had turned completely by spring. When Clara walked down Main Street now, people greeted her warmly. Women sought her advice on everything from minor ailments to serious concerns. Men trusted her to treat their injuries without question. The practice was thriving, busier than Nathaniel had ever handled alone, and they hired a part-time assistant to manage the administrative work so they could focus on patients. But the final confrontation Clara had been both dreading and anticipating came on a warm April afternoon when Gideon Hale appeared at the practice alone, without his usual entourage of supporters. Nathaniel was present this time, standing beside Clara as she invited Gideon into the consultation room. "What can we do for you, Mr. Hale?" Clara asked, her voice professionally neutral. Gideon looked older than when she'd first met him, his face drawn with something that might have been shame. "I came to apologize." The words hung in the air. Clara exchanged a glance with Nathaniel, then focused back on Gideon. "I'm listening." "What I did to you when you first arrived, rejecting you publicly, humiliating you, trying to force you out of town, it was cruel and unforgivable." Gideon's voice was stiff but sincere. "I told myself I was protecting my reputation, maintaining standards. But the truth is, I was scared. Scared of the responsibility of raising another man's children. Scared of what people would think. So I took the coward's way out and blamed you for circumstances beyond your control." Clara waited. There had to be more. "Then I watched you build a life here despite everything I'd done. Watched you become a physician when I'd expected you to disappear in shame. Watched you earn the respect I'd tried to deny you." Gideon met her eyes. My own mother took ill 3 weeks ago. Pneumonia. Dr. Webb was out of town, so you came to treat her. You stayed with her for 2 days, barely sleeping until the crisis passed. You saved her life. Clara remembered. An elderly woman, Gideon's mother, fighting for breath in a small house on the edge of town. She'd done what she always did, her job, without consideration of politics or personal history. She told me afterward that you never mentioned what I'd done to you, never held it against her or gave her anything less than your best care. She said you were the finest physician she'd encountered in 50 years. Gideon's voice cracked slightly. That's when I realized what I'd tried to destroy. Not just a woman seeking work, but someone with genuine talent and calling. Someone who could have died in poverty because of my selfishness, and the world would have been poorer for it. Thank you for the apology, Clara said carefully. I accept it. But Mr. Hale, I need you to understand something. What you did to me was terrible, yes. But what you did to every woman who might have come after me was worse. You reinforced the idea that women are disposable, that our worth is conditional, that we can be discarded the moment we're inconvenient. That kind of thinking causes real harm. I know. Gideon's shoulders slumped. I can't undo what I did, but I can stop perpetuating it. I've already spoken to the town council about establishing a fund to help widows and single mothers who arrive in Riverdale with nowhere to go. It won't make up for my actions, but it might prevent someone else from facing what you faced. Clara felt something loosen in her chest. Not quite forgiveness, that would take time, but acknowledgement. Gideon was trying to make amends, not just with words, but with action. That mattered. That's a good start, she said quietly. Thank you. After Gideon left, Nathaniel pulled Clara into his arms. Are you all right? I think so. It's strange. I've spent so many months being angry at him, and now that he's apologized, I'm not sure what to feel. You don't have to feel anything right away. Forgiveness takes time. Healing takes time. Nathaniel kissed her forehead. But I'm proud of you for hearing him out. Not everyone could have done that. He saved his mother's life by swallowing his pride. That took courage. Clara leaned into Nathaniel's embrace. And maybe that's what redemption looks like. Not grand gestures, but small acts of courage repeated until they become habit. Summer arrived with the kind of beauty that made the brutal winter feel like a distant memory. The prairie bloomed in wild profusion, and the twins, now walking and getting into everything, filled the house with laughter and chaos. Clara's competency examination came and went, passed with high marks that even the most critical board members had to acknowledge. Her registration was renewed for another year, and Nathaniel began making inquiries about how she might eventually obtain a full medical license without formal schooling. There are precedents, he told her one evening as they reviewed case notes together. Physicians who trained through apprenticeship and proved their competence through examination. It's rare, but possible. With your track record, I think we could make a strong case. A full license? Clara felt hope flutter in her chest. Do you really think it's possible? I think you've already proven you're a physician in everything but paperwork. The rest is just bureaucracy, and bureaucracy can be navigated with enough persistence and documentation. Nathaniel smiled. Besides, Riverdale needs you officially. We can't have our best doctor working under someone else's license forever. The suggestion became a goal, and Clara threw herself into it with the same determination she'd brought to everything else. She studied even more intensively, documented every case meticulously, gathered testimonials from patients whose lives she'd saved or improved. Mayor Whitfield offered to write a letter of recommendation. His daughter was thriving under Clara's continued care. Billy Crawford's father did the same. Even Eleanor Thornton, in a development that shocked everyone, submitted a testimonial about Clara's treatment of Lydia's pneumonia and subsequent respiratory issues. By autumn, they'd assembled a portfolio thick enough to submit to the Territorial Medical Board with a formal petition for Clara to sit for full licensing examination. The board agreed to review the petition, though they made no promises about approval. Clara tried not to get her hopes up too high, but she couldn't help imagining what it would mean. Dr. Clara Webb, licensed physician, not apprentice, not assistant, a full colleague in every sense. The answer came in November, exactly 1 year after the night they'd saved the Peterson family from scarlet fever. Nathaniel collected the letter from the post office and brought it home with his hands shaking slightly. Clara opened it at the kitchen table while the twins played at her feet, and her eyes filled with tears as she read. The board had approved her petition. She would sit for examination in Yankton in December. If she passed, she'd receive a full medical license to practice in the Dakota Territory without supervision or restriction. "I can't believe it," Clara whispered. "They actually approved it." Nathaniel was beaming. "I told you they would. Your record speaks for itself." "But what if I fail the examination?" "You won't. You know more medicine than half the licensed physicians in this territory, and you've proven it under conditions most of them never face." Nathaniel pulled her to her feet, the twins protesting the disruption. "You're going to pass, Clara, and then you're going to make history as one of the first women licensed to practice medicine in Dakota Territory through the apprenticeship pathway." The examination was grueling. 3 days of written tests, oral questioning, and practical demonstrations. Clara barely slept, her mind racing through every piece of knowledge she'd accumulated over the past year and a half. But when the examiners asked her questions, the answers came naturally. When they presented cases for her to diagnose, she worked through them methodically. When they asked her to demonstrate procedures, her hands were steady and sure. On the 3rd day after the final practical examination, the head examiner, an elderly physician named Dr. Patterson, asked her to stay behind while the others were dismissed. Clara's heart sank. Had she failed? Made some critical error? But Dr. Patterson was smiling. "Mrs. Webb, I've been examining physician candidates for 20 years. I've never seen anyone with your combination of practical skill and theoretical knowledge who learned through apprenticeship alone. Your husband must be an exceptional teacher." "He is, but the learning was mine." Clara met his eyes steadily. "I studied every night after my children slept. I read every text I could find. I practiced every skill until I could do it without thinking. Dr. Webb opened the door, but I walked through it myself." "That's evident. Which is why I wanted to tell you personally, you've passed, with the highest marks of any candidate this year." Dr. Patterson extended his hand. "Congratulations, Dr. Webb. You've earned your license." Clara felt tears spill down her cheeks as she shook his hand. "Dr. Webb, not apprentice, not assistant, doctor. A real licensed physician with all the rights and responsibilities that came with it." She rode back to Riverdale in a daze of joy and disbelief, clutching her license certificate like a talisman. Nathaniel met her at the depot, took one look at her face, and swept her into his arms right there on the platform for everyone to see. "You passed," he said, laughing. "I knew you would." "I'm a doctor," Clara whispered against his chest. "A real doctor." "You were always a real doctor. Now you just have the paper to prove it." The celebration that night was everything Clara could have hoped for. Martha hosted at the boarding house, inviting everyone who'd supported Clara through her journey. The Petersons came with all 6 children, healthy and thriving. Billy Crawford brought Mary, now his fiancée. Mayor Whitfield arrived with his wife and infant daughter. Even Eleanor Thornton appeared with Lydia, who was preparing to leave for teachers' college in the spring. "I wanted to tell you personally," Eleanor said stiffly. "I was wrong about you. You've proven that competence has no gender, and my daughter is pursuing education because you showed her that women can achieve more than society expects. So, thank you." Clara accepted the words with grace, understanding how much they'd cost Eleanor's pride. Progress wasn't always graceful or easy. Sometimes it came in awkward apologies and grudging admissions, but it still counted. Late that night, after the celebration had ended and the twins were asleep, Clara and Nathaniel stood together in their home, looking at the official license hanging on the wall. Dr. Clara Webb, licensed to practice medicine and surgery in the Dakota Territory. Proof that the impossible could become real through determination, skill, and refusal to accept limitations imposed by others. "What do you want to do now?" Nathaniel asked, his arm around her waist. Clara thought about the question. She had her license. She had a thriving practice. She had a husband she loved and children who were happy. She had respect from a community that had initially rejected her. In many ways, she'd achieved everything she'd dreamed of during those desperate first days in Riverdale. But there was more to do, always more. "I want to train other women," she said slowly, "the way you trained me." I want to create pathways for women who have the calling but not the means. I want to prove that what happened to me, going from rejected mail-order bride to licensed physician, isn't a miracle. It's just what happens when women are given real opportunities and refuse to accept artificial limitations. Nathaniel smiled. Then that's what we'll do. Together. Together, Clara agreed, and they did. Over the next years, Clara became known not just as an exceptional physician, but as a teacher who opened doors for other women. She took on apprentices, women like she'd been, desperate for purpose and willing to work for it. She documented her training methods, wrote articles for medical journals about the apprenticeship pathway, gave testimony to territorial boards about expanding access to medical education. Some of her students went on to formal medical schools, armed with the knowledge and confidence Clara had given them. Others followed her path, earning licenses through apprenticeship and examination. A few returned to their communities and practiced informally, helping where help was needed even without official recognition. But all of them carried forward what Clara had learned, that healing was a calling that transcended gender, that competence could be earned through dedication and hard work, that the fight for recognition was worth fighting because it opened doors for those who came after. The twins grew up in the practice, learning medicine the way other children learned family trades. Lucy developed her mother's gift for diagnosis, that intuitive understanding of how symptoms connected to underlying conditions. Samuel inherited his adoptive father's surgical precision, his steady hands and calm demeanor under pressure. Both would eventually become physicians themselves, part of a new generation that saw nothing unusual about women in medicine. Riverdale changed too, slowly but undeniably. The town that had once been so resistant to Clara's presence gradually became proud of her accomplishments. New businesses opened, drawn by Riverdale's reputation for progressive attitudes. Women found more opportunities, not just in medicine, but in other professions previously closed to them. The town council, which eventually included 2 women, one of them a former apprentice of Clara's, passed ordinances protecting workers' rights and establishing public health standards that became models for other communities. And through it all, Clara and Nathaniel worked side by side, equal partners in medicine and in life, facing challenges together, celebrating victories together, building something larger than either of them could have created alone. Their marriage wasn't perfect. They argued about treatment protocols, disagreed about how to handle difficult patients, struggled with the constant demands of their work. But beneath the daily friction ran a current of deep respect and genuine love that made the struggles worthwhile. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Nathaniel gave Clara a gift she hadn't expected, a brass nameplate for the practice door. It read, "Webb Medical Practice, Dr. Nathaniel Webb and Dr. Clara Webb, physicians. Equal billing, equal recognition. Exactly as it should be." "I should have done this years ago," Nathaniel said as they hung it together. "You've been my full partner from the beginning. The sign should reflect that." Clara traced the letters of her name, feeling the solid weight of recognition under her fingers. Doctora Clara Webb, not assistant, not apprentice, not someone who'd been given opportunities through charity or pity, a physician who'd earned her place through competence, courage, and absolute refusal to accept that her gender made her lesser. She thought about the girl who'd stepped off the stagecoach that freezing February day, desperate, terrified, clutching her babies, and clinging to hope that felt increasingly fragile. That girl had believed she needed a man to save her, to give her worth, to make her whole. She'd been wrong. The salvation had come from within, from her own strength and determination. Nathaniel had opened doors, yes, but she'd walked through them herself, had faced down opposition, proven herself repeatedly, built a life and career that mattered. And now, standing beside her husband and equal partner, looking at her name on the practice door, Clara understood that this was what victory looked like. Not perfect, not without scars, but real and hard-won and entirely hers. The winter widow who had arrived with nothing had become Dr. Clara Webb, licensed physician, teacher, wife, mother. She'd taken rejection and transformed it into purpose, had faced down prejudice and proven it false through undeniable competence, had opened pathways for other women to follow. Some stories began with desperation and ended with triumph. This was one of them. And as Clara stood there with Nathaniel's arm around her shoulders and the brass nameplate gleaming in the afternoon sun, she allowed herself to feel what she'd denied for so long, pride in what she'd accomplished, gratitude for what she'd been given, and hope for everything still to come. The future stretched ahead full of possibilities. More patients to help. More women to teach. More lives to save. More moments of partnership and love with the man who'd seen her potential when others saw only problems. It would be hard work. Frontier medicine always was. But Clara had never been afraid of hard work. She'd built everything she had from determination and refusal to accept defeat. She could build more, would build more. Together with Nathaniel, together with the community of women physicians she was helping create, together with everyone who believed that competence mattered more than prejudice. The story that began with rejection in a frozen depot ended here, in front of a practice that bore her name in brass. Dr. Clara Webb, who'd learned that salvation wasn't something given by others. It was something you created yourself, one difficult choice at a time, until the impossible became simply what you did every day. And that, Clara thought as she turned to kiss her husband and head back inside to the patients who needed them, was exactly how it should be. The end wasn't an ending at all. It was just another beginning, and Clara couldn't wait to see what came next.